Ready when you are. Thank you. Great. Thank you. Good evening. Thanks. I'll call the meeting to order. Wenham FinCom on the 27th of February at 6:38. And we've got a full committee once David arrives, and as I mentioned, he'll be here shortly. So we can get started. First up, our minutes. So we've got a ton. Thank you, Catherine, for sending these. So I don't know the best way to kind of do them going forward. I mean, this is obviously the intensive kind of fall behind, defer, procrastinate or whatever. And then, although not on Catherine's part, she's sending them, and I'm reviewing in kind of drips and drabs and sending up these two look good, these two look good. Now we have a whole host of them here. So I know that from chatting with you all that you've had a chance to look them over. Carrie already found a couple minor, extra zero type thing, which matters, of course. So Catherine will incorporate those as needed. I'm fine with all of the form and the content as always. Thank you. Great job. And they were a good refresher, I think, at this stage in particular, and maybe speaks to bundling a whole ton of them at one time, because it reminds you what you've done over the past, 2.5 months.
Sure.
Whereas it's easy to forget because it flies by. Are they a consent format? Are we kind of naming in one motion probably each date for the meeting that we should?
You have to make separate motions, but if you would just read the dates.
Read the dates in one motion. Okay. Okay. So I move that the FinCom approve the minutes as provided for the following meetings. December 4th, 2018. Actually, 2 meetings on the 4th, because we called to order for an RFT and then for a joint meeting over Bucher, or Town Hall, then we went across the street. Second meeting on December 4th. January 23rd, 2019. January 30th, 2019. January 31st, 2019. That was our triple up week. Many have been double since. And that brings us not up to date entirely, but at least the first chunk.
You should
right?
be up to date with me, though.
With you, okay, so we've got some February minutes that are coming. Great. Okay, so that was a lot to go through. And if anyone has any questions or comments, we can do that, or we can go to a vote if not. Yes,
Would you like me just to distribute the February minutes to everybody this week?
Yeah, please, just send them out to everybody when you can, and then, because next thing you know, we'll have town meeting, and then we'll not want to come back just for minutes alone. Okay, great. So I'll go to a vote then, if there's no other discussion. All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Minutes. Okay, Patty, we've got an RFT.
We've got actually 2 of them.
2 of them? Okay.
I
read
put
one
the second
earlier.
one. Yeah, I think I sent the second one later because I realized we weren't going to be meeting for a while, possibly after this, and I didn't want to have to drag everybody in to do another reserve fund transfer. So there's 2 in front of you. One is for library salary and wages. As you know, we had discussed we had a long-term employee retire and had some significant sick time buyout. So what we've done, we budgeted for half of it in fiscal 20 with the agreement that we would pay the first half in fiscal 19. So that has been paid. The employee has retired, so we need to be able just to cover the shortfall in that salary account until May, when we can actually run it over if we need to. I don't think that we will now that I've got this reserve fund. So we just wanted to compensate ourselves for that.
So that's the half of the amount. Is it for the? Were there 2 employees I thought that were retired? Obviously there's the library director, but there's also one other, right?
This is the other one.
Oh, this is the other one.
This is the other one.
Okay.
And the library director is up and coming, but I'm a little squishy on the timing as far as when that buyout will be, and it might be into May.
Okay.
So I won't have to worry about it until we do our year-end transfers.
So there are 2 retiring employees.
Correct.
Collectively substantial from the library, right, with the unused sick time and sick buyout.
Yep.
And are we splitting that one as well?
Yes,
over 2 years?
as well. If you remember, maybe you don't remember because there was a lot going on, but there's those 2 halves were in the benefits section of the fiscal '20 budget, so we'll have it budgeted in fiscal '20.
Got it.
And I suspect that
That's
when
right.
we load the budget, we'll put it in that department, so we don't have to worry about moving it at the end of the year.
Yep. Okay.
So that's the first one. Do you want me to go through the second one? or-
Can I just
Yeah,
ask
sure.
a
of course.
question about the, so, what is the agreements with the buyout of sick time with the employees? How's that structured?
For non-union, they can buy back half their time up to 180 days. So it's basically 180 days is the max they can buy out. So clearly, someone who's been here a while pretty much has most of that time.
$34,000 worth.
Yeah. Yep.
And is it typical that it comes from the general reserve fund as opposed to some other
Well, typically,
planning? You know, is there a way to plan for this?
you know, there is a way to plan for it, and in other municipalities where I've worked, we have planned for it. We had funds set up that were for we called it compensated absences.
Yep.
And what we would do is, at the end of the year, if we had any kind of surplus that we were, you know, lucky enough to experience, we'd kind of move some of that into there, move some of that into there. Sometimes, if you want, you can just put money into it. I mean, because of the way our budget runs pretty tight here, that's a little difficult to do. So what we're trying to do, and what Peter has done, is that he has worked into, I believe, a lot of the contracts that we need to know prior to the planning year.
Mhm.
If someone plans on retiring, or we're not obligated to pay it. I'm not going to say that we wouldn't, but we're not obligated to pay it until we have a year to plan for it. So in this situation, they said they could do half and half.
So there's a 12-month period of time from when someone retires to pay that?
I
Is
don't
that what
think-
you're?
Yeah, I think what they try to do is, I apologize for not being more better versed in
That's
it.
all right.
Wasn't it
I'm
the
just trying to get a
beginning of,
general
like, the
sense.
beginning of the fiscal
It-
year,
From my
they need to
understanding,
get
is if you let
notice?
them know by the beginning of December, while we're in the middle of planning, or maybe
Yeah.
it's a little bit sooner here. I know where we were before, and actually Peter had negotiated that there as well, that we would have, we had to know by a certain date, so when we were during our planning cycle, we could plan for that. And that's just, I mean, that would be a great thing, and hopefully that will work, because it's so much easier just to plan for it. But yeah, ultimately, would it be great to have a reserve fund for it, so when this happens, yeah, absolutely. Whether or not that's something that's viable now is.
Thank you.
It's a liability on the books for other employees who have substantial
Mhm.
unused sick time.
Yep.
And I think, do we have a sense for how much there is out there, kind of? I mean,
Um,
even if you don't know when people are gonna retire, of course.
You don't,
so-
but I mean, certainly every year when they do the audit, I know one of the exercises we've had to go through every year is you look at how much time people have in the books, what they're eligible for, and you look at what your liability could be. I actually don't know what that is here, honestly. I
And-
haven't had a chance to look at it.
So I know the school district is working through their contract negotiations, and in the process, they're trying to limit the buyouts. And did you just say for non-union is where this applies to?
That
Where
applies to
there's some
non-union.
contractual
and
negotiations
yeah.
available?
There's no contracts. I think it's more of a policy, and Peter could probably answer this better than me, but I'm not sure if it's that these are pretty much grandfathered people. I'm not sure this extends to the people that are coming in new.
More recent hires?
Yeah. So, I'm not sure if that's the case or not. Or maybe you have to be here a few years before you're eligible for it. And I can certainly find that out.
And is it always that 180-day?
Yeah, yeah. That's for the non-union anyway.
Yeah.
And for contracted employees is defined within the
Within the collective bargaining,
language of
yeah.
the contract.
Yep.
Well, we're spreading it out over 2 years at least, and actually that helps both parties, I guess, right?
Yep.
From a tax standpoint too,
Mhm.
unless you've got some really lucrative gig lined up for as soon as, the day you retire, in which case,
Mm.
keep deferring. Okay, so, and then the 48, 83, 65, that's the balance in the.
That's what's left in there, and because that employee has already been replaced, we're already paying a salary against that.
Yep,
So that won't last us very long.
right,
with
Oh,
that
yeah.
person.
right, okay. Okay, so, we're two separate motions for these, is that right?
Sure, you want to do this one
Okay.
first and then go to the second one, or?
Yeah, either or maybe we could discuss the second one, I
Okay.
guess. Yeah.
So the second one is basically for the finance department, and the reason it's basically our expenses, we're right at the edge right now, and the reason being that during the turnover in the finance department, we had a temporary or an interim treasurer tax collector who was working here from probably, I believe it was August, until about a couple of weeks after I got here. And she was being paid out of the expenses versus the salary. So we can't overrun the expenses, but certainly by the end of the year, we'll see an offset in our salary department. Bless you for that. So it's just a matter of we're getting very close on our expenses. And we still have some mailings to do, we still have some billings to do, and I want to make sure that we have enough money to cover those expenses. And I've listed some of those out at the bottom of the reserve fund.
This full-time, part-time employee?
This was a part-time employee, yeah.
Was, okay,
Yeah.
yep,
But it was at a contracted rate, so it certainly,
right,
absorbed a lot of the expense budget.
got it. That's for $8,000.
And the expense was much more than that. This is what I think will get us through the end of the year. We don't need to have the whole amount replaced right now. So,
Okay, until it's in the salary line.
Yeah.
Yep, okay, makes sense to me.
It's at the end of the calendar year or fiscal year?
End of the fiscal year.
Okay.
Actually, one question back to the sick time buyback. Did, I caught last night's meeting. Were you here for last night's meeting as well? It's a good one. Look at,
4
like,
hours?
yeah, close to right. I fast forwarded to the good parts. But I think I recall Peter saying that there was a bump in revenue from Hamilton on the,
Oh, yeah.
on the portion,
Yeah.
is that right?
Yes.
In part due to this? I mean,
Yeah, basically what happens is,
Every bit helps.
I went through the process of figuring out what the whole split would be.
yeah,
And there were a couple of things. We had to update some of the indirect costs to be updated for some of the structural changes within the finance department, because that's one of them. And I included these costs for next year. And we'll also see at the end of the year, when we do the true-up, at the end of the year, the first half of these pieces coming in.
okay. I think the net effect was to reduce the override ever so slightly, right?
Yeah, about 50,000, yeah.
Yeah, 50,000.
Mhm.
I would like to add, just for the record, in general and under these tight budget times, which are forecast for the next who knows how long, that I support reducing the buyouts to the extent possible in the future with future contracts, because I look at it as a social safety net if needed, and an expectation that someone would show up to work and it's much appreciated, but not, not getting this extra bonus.
Yeah, they certainly, I think they apply, hopefully, in not a really broad sense, insofar as the liability here, but I tend to agree. I think that you
Yeah,
want,
and I think,
you want it reflected in the salary.
I think Peter said that there is, and as you may have just referred to, for newer hires, that's something that's being taken into consideration. But some of these longer-term employees do great work, love, I know a lot of the work that a lot of these employees do, and it's great work, but, my thought is the expectation is you go to work, and if you need sick leave, great, that's what this is here for, but if you don't need it, then you don't get paid for it.
These hourly people or salary?
Salary.
It's a salary.
And it's just, it's a lot of money coming across our budget for these buyouts.
No question.
I agree
Are
with
you
that. I think
suggesting- I'm sorry, David, go ahead, you were first.
I think that's a hard, if people work a whole year, don't have a sick day, there's companies out there where you can buy your sick days back or buy vacation days I don't really have a problem with people getting sick days back that they've earned through the years.
Yeah, I just feel like it's there
It's
to.
our first disagreement, I think, in a year and a half. But I don't honestly, I know times have changed, pensions have changed, defined benefit versus defined contribution
we
through
just
the
have
years. but
we already have a lot of pressures with OPEB and healthcare costs, and, this is just a cost that I've never been paid out for unused sick leave, And I never took sick leave really, I mean, it's not about me, but anyway.
I think you frame your kind of viewpoint of it based on your personal experience, and I fit into that camp too. I mean, I can appreciate that it does show like a really, strong level of dedication and commitment to the job
Yeah.
over so many years, of course, to not use up sick time, right? And we know that there are people who would use sick time just
Yeah.
for the heck of it, to not work,
Yeah.
which kind of tips the scales back towards, well, there is value to that, to the employer, to the pay, to the,
Yes, I guess I
on the payer side.
also have an assumption that you would only use it if needed, which maybe
Which
it's a false
unfortunately
assumption.
isn't the case in the reality, yeah, so.
So you're not suggesting that we alter the amount of sick time that an employee has available, right?
No.
Correct, I just want to make sure what you're.
No,
Okay, so you're suggesting, these are my words, you're suggesting that we look at the policy of buyback,
yes.
or are you suggesting to eliminate the policy of buyback?
I'm not suggesting to eliminate it. Maybe that's one of the options to
So
consider.
you're suggesting that to review the buyback policy of sick time for all
Yes.
town employees?
Yes, because in my opinion, the sick leave is there as a type of social safety net if
Yeah.
needed,
Yeah.
rather than a reward for showing up to work.
So I
As
would-
expected that your salary's for. And, maybe there's bonuses or something. I look at maybe we don't do bonuses and this is like a bonus. But, in my mind, maybe cut it back, not 180 days, some lower amount.
Right. So my suggestion would be to you, Alex, as chair, is do we make a request to the Board of Selectmen? We don't have a human resource director.
Right.
You're essentially playing that function. I mean, how would you process this, and how would you put this forward for further discussion for a HR policy kind of consideration?
Yeah, I mean, it does boil down to the employment contracts, right? And
Well, for
it's-
those that
it's
don't
from
have
policy.
contracts as well. I mean, it's.
Yeah.
Right,
it's
I
kind of
don't
across
mean
the
union, I
board.
don't mean union contracts, I mean
Yeah.
those who are effectively
Agreements,
employees
so-
at will, but agreements, and it's part of their total compensation package as not a rider, but another piece of it that's just well understood by all parties. And I think I recall hearing that it did apply, that it has changed over time,
Yeah.
that it may be a
Yeah, I
little
think it has, yeah.
less.
And most
I mean,
towns are moving that way.
Yeah.
Yeah,
You're
I don't even
starting
know
to
what
see
the
that.
pool is that we would be looking
I
at.
mean,
or how
I can
many
go
of
through
them.
the union contracts if you want and come up with a matrix and just
Yeah.
show you what each one is and if that's something.
Yeah, I'm also very supportive of all the salary increases that we've
Mhm.
been requesting to get it competitive to surrounding areas and to merit what the job deserves. It's just this,
Well, part of the reaction is
Buyback.
probably to the difficulty in planning for it and budgeting for it, especially when we're running as lean as we are. So that's it forces you to look at it when you otherwise wouldn't. If it were a much smaller line item as a buyback, you'd say, if it was something in here, $1,500, $2,500, it didn't jump out as much. That you weren't doing a reserve fund transfer
yeah,
for.
like we're talking about,
That's obviously what forces us to.
we're looking at
take
like
another look at
6,000
it.
for a dehumidifier. What, should
Right.
we do that or not? We're
8,000,
just
yeah.
like slicing to the bone, and
Right.
this merits review in my opinion, but I don't know how big the pool of people is or what dollar amounts we're looking at
Yeah,
comprehensively.
I think, so to your point, I think just understanding in general what the current kind of guideline is
Mhm.
for kind of new positions, like how the town approaches them, to your point about, is there like a cap, does it kind of course you need to remain competitive too, and I'm sure people view this as basically part of their total compensation. If they're gonna be dedicated and show up and
Yeah.
not be sick,
Yeah, I mean,
that's
it
gonna
could
be a
be like a
kicker at the
bonus.
end, right,
We don't do
right.
bonuses.
Right. So it warrants at least understanding where we stand with respect to kind of outstanding liabilities. Are there a dozen other employees with a meaningful,
Yeah, times
five-figure,
35,000,
what have you, yeah, or not. It could very well be that this, I suspect it's outlier, that it shows the kind of really long-term employee, who's been with the town and done great work, which we'll appreciate for many, many years. But obviously they have the potential to, in lean years like these, be painful. And I'm glad we could split this over 2 years, because otherwise we would,
Yeah, that's helpful.
yeah. All right, thank you all for sharing thoughts on these questions.
I think we voted on this.
No, we didn't.
No.
No, I was gonna ask if there are any other to share. No? Okay, if not, then, do you want separate motions for these?
Probably, yeah.
Okay, so we'll start with the, we started with the library salary and wages technical services. So I move that the FinCom approve the reserve fund transfer request for $17,000 to be transferred to library salary and wages technical services with the present balance and set appropriation of $4,883.65 for the reasons I stated in the RFT here.
Second.
Thank you, Mike. Any further questions?
No.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Passes unanimously. And, thank you very much. I do.
Sure.
Yep.
We gotta get
Yep, thank you.
This is minutia, but do you have to sign the original? Is that how this works?
I don't know if it needs a wet signature, both.
No, I think that'll be okay.
Okay.
I only have one original. I have one original that I signed. It's fine, as long as. That's good, the original.
Okay. And for the second motion, I move that the FinCom approve the reserve fund transfer in the amount of $8,000 to be transferred to finance expenses with the present balance in said appropriation of $1,666.14 for the reasons discussed and as stated on the RFT. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, David. All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.
Did we postpone the minutes? Or did it just?
Oh, we did,
Just
we
missed
did
them.
them right when we got here, yeah.
We did vote, but if you had
Do you
any
have any
edits.
Oh, we
If
did
you have
not.
any edits,
Still
we
on.
just give them to her at the end.
Okay, thank you.
All right.
I did not.
Did you read them?
Two, actually. Not
Okay.
all of them.
Brings us to budget matters.
Most of them. We should split. Let's read the first three.
So Patty, do you want to give us, since you were here yesterday evening, I don't know if everyone had a chance to kind of tune into some of the BOS meeting yesterday. I mean, it was
I couldn't do the
obviously
whole thing
only
yesterday.
yesterday. Nor would I expect you to. And I don't think it's all, I mean, some of it's obviously germane, and you might watch the whole thing in your free time, but I don't know who had 4 hours today. I don't know how you stay awake all day after.
But I would just say kudos
Peter
to everyone who sits
BOS.
through these meetings and does all that work for 4 hours straight.
That's
After
great.
a whole
It's
day of
tremendous
work.
commitment to time, yeah.
Yeah, I appreciate it.
Yep, I do too.
So the budget schedule that you have, the one that you've seen many, many iterations of this cycle is the most recent one. We updated it right before the meeting last night for the change in the library allocation. So I know we had been talking about a $665,000 override for the
Yep.
schools. Now we're down to about $615
Yep.
because we added in some additional assessment that will be
Oh,
going
yeah.
out to Hamilton, as well as some more solid numbers with a couple of other assessments. So basically, nothing else has changed. We tweaked a few numbers with respect to knowing a little bit more about the Veterans Organization, and, but nothing material has changed since what you saw the last time. So everything's pretty much as we were. A lot of the discussion, if you watched some of it last night, really, we just kind of talked about this briefly, and we really focused on the warrant articles more than anything, and in particular the Capital Preservation Committee one.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know how
That
you
part I didn't watch, yeah.
folks have done this in the past. Do you vote the budget by line?
We'll eventually vote the budget by line,
Okay.
Yeah, at the,
but,
That's where Alex
at the
needs a
budget
lot of
Do
water.
we call it a budget hearing?
we don't do line by line at town meeting,
Well,
but,
you go-
Before that, the budget
you go-
review or hearing, what do we call
Oh,
it?
you go by account by account.
Yeah.
That's my joke. is
Yeah.
that-
well,
Usually, they would just need to vote to recommend Article 1,
Yeah,
and then the line by line would be at town meeting where Alex gets the true
Oh,
joy
okay.
of reading it line by line and asking for holds for questions.
that's right, yeah.
Traditionally, you have not at this meeting voted.
No,
The
no,
FinCom
just
okay.
for action here,
That's
right,
different than-
right.
just for
but
that
we also
process.
have that prior meeting where we present the budget here.
But that's a warrant hearing though, so
Oh, yeah,
there's
the
no,
warrant
no
hearing.
voting, that's just the
Oh.
like dress
Presentation,
rehearsal
got
and
it,
education.
yeah.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
Okay.
Patrice, just to clarify for myself, so this is a number, I'm not sure if it's exactly right. The 110,000 that we, I guess, approved and supported in terms of town operations override. Just ringing any bells to anybody?
I was reading an article, can you repeat that, Jim?
Yeah.
When we last met, we reviewed the line, the operating requests that were
Over and above.
Over
Yep.
and above. Okay. And what the finance committee and I think with the Board of Selectmen, we arrived at, I think, $110,000.
Yeah, you're right, yep. It's about $107,000 of all the,
$107,000.
that
Yep.
matrix that we looked at.
Yeah.
Over the budget, okay.
Yep.
So
Okay.
that's
Over level
not-
services?
That's not included in these numbers.
No, it should be.
Those are included in these numbers.
Those
They
are
are.
And
included
the
in
way
these
we-
numbers.
Yeah, and the way the budget flushed out is we had a certain, we know what we can tax up to our levy limit, and the rest has been flushing out for a school override.
Okay,
So-
so there's not, this is kind of, I'm going down a different
That's
path.
fine.
So there's not a request to the community
Mhm.
for a town operations override for that 107,000. We have
No.
incorporated
No,
that into the operating budget within the tax,
Correct,
within the levy limit.
correct.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So you have here, and I only gave there's 12 warrant articles here, it's all the financial warrant articles here, and I gave them to you all in color because it's easier to.
Thank you.
What's
Yeah.
going on here, so
Yeah.
basically, the way you can look at these, and they're in draft form still, of course, is that anything in yellow was voted by the Board of Selectmen just to put on the warrant,
Yeah.
Right.
okay? Anything that has green, obviously you can see was voted in action.
Mm-hmm.
Anything in red, and I think there's only one,
At the end, right?
was, they just didn't take any action on just because they just didn't, but I suspect that it will be on the warrant.
Sure,
So,
sure.
But that's pretty much what we did last night. We went through the first 12 articles, and they decided, just basically, more than anything, decided what they were gonna put on the warrant.
I didn't watch the whole meeting. Did they decide there was some debate about the number of warrants going from 37 to that's
It's still kind of being
so?
decided. They're gonna be
Okay.
meeting again, I believe, on Monday.
Try
Okay.
not to have an overwhelming number, right?
Yeah.
30 plus.
Yeah.
Is it 27?
It's 27 articles.
yeah.
Everything after Article, that I gave you, Article
Yeah.
12, starts getting into the zoning articles, the
Yeah,
bylaw
Tons of
articles.
zoning board,
Things
yeah.
that you don't have to take a
Right,
position
right.
on, so I just didn't bother to get.
And there are contentious non-override votes as well, right? With, for example, Affordable Housing Trust, CPC, and with the,
Yeah, and
What's it
luckily
called?
we have our CPC expert here
Right.
tonight. Do you have any questions as we move on?
Herbert. So it sounded like the structure was pretty well set in terms of the articles themselves,
Mhm.
those that relate to the budget primarily.
Yep,
Article 1, levy limit budget. Article 2, use of free cash. Those two, well, Article 2 we've used as our free cash article for as long as I can remember.
Yeah.
Or at least, yeah, as long as I've been a part of this process.
Yep.
Article 3, of course, last year was the school override, which it is as well for this year. The difference being that Article 4, in this case, which last year was there was the school's debt exclusion, right? If I
Yeah.
recall. Last year, Article 3 was $331,000 override. This year's, what is it, 605?
it'll actually,
It's
it'll
$499.
be $499 because we're
Okay.
breaking out the
Of course.
override
Exactly.
between the
Thank
two.
you.
Oh,
Right.
okay.
Right. In total, just over 600,000 between
615,000.
3 and 4, Articles 3 and 4.
Correct.
Override. So 1, 3, and 4, well, technically 2 as well, because free cash is used to balance the budget. So the 4 articles themselves in full fund the Wenham assessment from the regional school district, which of course is required according to the statutes, right? I mean, you have to do that, goes without saying. So if any of them were to not pass at the ballot, then it's a failed budget
Mhm.
For the schools.
for the
Yeah.
schools,
Yep.
right? Right.
It's not like the debt exclusion that it
That's right.
failed, but it wasn't a failed budget, even though the article
Right.
failed.
Yeah.
And last night too, it also, when you look at Article 3 and Article 4,
Mhm.
if Article 3 passed, and Article 4 didn't, because Article 4 is just pulling out that
Yeah.
OPEB and the
Yep.
ESSER, it's still a failed budget.
Still a
Yeah.
failed budget, and for the amount, the $116,119, which is roughly 1/3 of the above-level services asks of SRO and OPEB, for Wenham, they, of course, the school would not have to
Yeah.
remove those items
Yeah.
exactly
Right.
from the budget. They could, go back to the drawing board and present the exact same budget, or they could reduce the amount, but it needn't be by
Yeah,
exactly
they
that.
can, yeah.
So the question for our overrides, if we remember last year, there was one for both towns. Hamilton did not pass it.
Right,
So we didn't have to vote on it.
or the debt
That was the debt
exclusion,
exclusion.
yeah.
So is Hamilton separating the two? Do we know?
Peter mentioned last night that he's had some discussion with them, but I don't
Okay.
think it's final yet as to
Okay.
their approach, but hinted at their maybe considering, or suggested that they're considering a similar approach, but I have no firsthand,
But
only what was
also,
said in the meeting last night.
so last year, the debt exclusion failed, and it's not related to the overall budget failing, so we still voted on the budget. What if the
Right.
budget fails in Hamilton? What do we do in our town meeting? Because it's all, we just do Article 1?
That's a great
That's a
question. The
question.
procedure, if it were to fail, because they kind of are up first,
Mm-hmm.
right? Yeah, well, they don't need an override, right? So they're not
That's
going to the
They're not gonna
ballots.
vote on an override.
They're not
Oh,
gonna,
that- yeah,
yeah,
that's right.
they're gonna vote on
But
the
if their,
budget.
Unless their budget
I used
fails.
the wrong term.
Right.
If their article
One.
related to the school budget fails.
If their town operating budget,
Yeah.
including the Hamilton assessment,
Yes.
were to fail, then yeah, they've got major problems, but
When is
that's
the,
likely not
excuse me,
gonna be the case. No, go ahead.
when is the Hamilton town meeting?
It's usually in the morning,
Dave,
and
same
ours
day.
is at like
Ours,
1, and
yeah.
theirs at like 9 or something.
On the same day?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Oh, okay.
yeah.
Is the SR open? I don't know who I'm asking. Has that been finalized yet?
No, you- I
To the
think-
crowd? Is that still?
Yeah, well, I think for reasons that we can talk about, I mean, it's called out, I think BOS, largely because there was no result, right? There was no resolution, rather, of all the open questions related to SRO. The BOS chose to call that out as a separate warrant article, coupled with it, the OPEB
Okay.
for the above-level
Yeah,
services.
just to
which I think-
highlight the
I think
issue.
makes sense.
Sorry, I keep cutting you off.
No, it's fine, go right ahead.
Trying to be efficient.
That is. I welcome it. Talk over me, I won't be offended,
I
believe me.
apologize.
Nope.
Please do it to me.
Oh,
And what was I gonna say?
Overrides SRO.
Yeah, never mind.
Is there a reason they, without making a long, lengthy conversation, they link the OPEB and the RSO together? Because the OPEB is pretty, is crucial, but yet they link them both together. Just, I don't remember.
Why the BOS put them together like
Yeah,
that?
yeah.
I think that,
I remember.
I can't speak for them directly, but the sense I get from watching their discussion is that they're calling it out purely as the above-level services asks. So, you're presenting to the town an option which, it's not really fair to call it an option, because it's not either or, right?
Right.
If you fund this, what I'll call the option of funding the school's level services budget, and not the above-level services, then you've in effect not funded the budget, period, strikes it, and it's dead in the water. But I think that's what it's designed to help residents understand and explain, here's the dollar amount associated with our town budget that gets to our portion of their budget on the level services front.
Gotcha.
And this additional amount funds our portion of what's above and beyond that. And given that there are just those two items, I think theoretically you could probably, there probably was even a little bit of discussion, if I had to guess, about should we have Articles 4 and 5
Yeah.
for OPEB, and then, but at that point, I think it's, I mean, the third of the 75, the 27 or whatever it is roughly, would
Mm-hmm.
to have a separate article for that alone.
Yeah, and if I might, if you don't mind, one of the
course.
reasons why, and I don't suggest to put words into the selectmen's mouth, but one of the themes that keeps coming up is that the 250 is 250 this year, and it's proposed to be 500 next
Yeah.
year, 750, and I
Yep.
think by pulling it out, it's a way to generate some discussion as to what that what we could be looking at down the road up to, and I
Yeah.
think it's up to 1.25 million.
It is in 2024.
Right, right,
Yeah.
so I think that's probably another reason why, culling it out was a way to just to generate some discussion.
Right,
Got it.
right.
Yeah, I think regarding the SRO, just because it's supposedly at some point gonna be fully funded by the town of Hamilton, but that's not hammered out yet, how that's all gonna play out, because it's up in the air, just wait until that's figured out,
Yeah,
is my
Yeah.
impression.
right,
Gotcha. Thank you.
sure. So, any thought, do you want to just dive into these on Article 1?
Yes.
Hold on.
Anyone gonna say no to Article 1? I hope not.
No, but I have a question about Article 1.
Of course.
Loose leaf pickup. So this is 19,798, and the loose leaf pickup is about 50,000. So when we do Article 1, is there gonna be discussion and a line item to strike loose leaf pickup as an option? And so then you're not, so then you can, because my understanding is you can reduce an amount.
But you can't raise it.
Right, but you can't raise it without finding
Which is the reason why it
offsets.
was left in.
Yes, I
Right,
understand.
yeah.
So are we gonna, what's the plan for highlighting that, or is there a plan?
I don't know that that's been
Yeah,
finalized
I
yet.
don't, yeah.
I was just looking for the note about that.
So it's within the budget, it's the extra driver is included, the extra person.
No,
Oh, no.
No.
But
No,
you
it's
still
just-
do the
but we
loose
still
leaf
would,
pickup.
yeah.
Yeah, it's,
These-
it's status quo
Yeah, it's just
option.
basically, yeah, nothing changed.
Yeah.
Right,
Cool.
right.
To Carrie's
Later.
point, is that gonna be discussed? No?
I'm not sure.
Okay.
Well, if you-
I'm for discussing it.
I mean, I would
Maybe.
imagine if
I'm
someone's
for him
gonna make a
discussing
motion
it.
on the floor,
There's not the
Yeah.
opportunity to discuss it if you just do a
General.
Article 1
Mm.
vote.
Right.
As
If we
it
have, if
stands,
we,
that-
But you
right.
It's not
do-
gonna, how would it jump out to?
But you go through the line, well, this is what we talked about when we decided to do this way, is that you can strike things.
Right,
But if
if it
you
fails, we can't
increase
add
it, you
back
have to
in.
find an offset.
Right.
So my
Right.
question is, how do you present something that you want to strike?
You
And
have a
it-
motion on the floor
Mhm.
to do so.
So are we allowed to do motions on the floor?
any resident.
Any
It-
member
it-
of
Any
town
resident
meeting.
can, yeah.
And I think
I
that's.
vote Alex do that motion.
Well, I mean, Alex, if I recall correctly, I haven't sat through your town meeting, yet, you go through and you read every
Yes.
department, right?
Yes.
At which point you, I think I remember watching, that you
Hold.
ask someone to hold
Sure.
or strike,
Yeah.
okay. At that point, someone would probably say, I wanna hold the public works budget, and then we get back, and
Mhm.
that's when someone could make a motion on the floor
Right,
to make the change for that.
right.
That's my understanding.
That's right. I'll have my leaf blower. So you can make the motion. We'll have
We can
to.
do a
That's a
demonstration. I'll
fine.
bring a
That's a
big
finer
bag.
point, but we, as we've talked about, I mean, that's the savings, right? Of-
Yeah, 50,000.
Of 40,000, I think.
Yeah.
But it's left in the budget now, right?
Correct.
It's
Yeah.
not stripped out, because otherwise we're in a position where if it doesn't pass, if the town's just like, please, just keep the loose leaf pickup, for goodness sake, then we're stuck trying to carve out 40 grand
Yeah,
on
we'd
the
have to try
fly
to
from somewhere
rebalance
else,
it.
which
Which
is
we
not
don't
a good position to
have.
be in. So yeah, so that was left, but we could have a motion on the floor, so it's a good question. We could,
Okay.
that's something we need to follow up on if we wanna, come up with, the upfront kind of information about how that would work, right, and educate people on the fly real quickly. Okay, let's save 40 grand. Jackie?
I'm sorry, just to interrupt briefly. I will say one thing that was discussed last night too is that, just because Patty hasn't done the process before here in Wenham, is that a good deal of March is spent working on the script and
Mhm.
making sure, and I think that from the debrief that occurred last year, there was some conversation about different people from different committees owning articles. And so I think that
Great point.
planning happens a lot in March, once the warrant is finalized, that planning of who's speaking to what issues and who's answering what questions. That always happens in March, getting ready for
Right.
the warrant hearing.
Everybody's roles
Yeah, exactly.
well known by then. It's pretty well scripted.
Yeah.
Yep. Thank you,
And I know,
Jackie.
and
Yeah.
I know Peter did mention that last night, because I think that's gonna be obviously a good deal of his time in March.
Yeah.
Thank you.
That's all I have about Article 1.
Okay. No, glad you brought it up. Thank you.
Even though it was hatchet woman. Till tonight.
Okay, thoughts or questions? Should we? Well, I don't establish a motion, then we can decide whether or not we want to go to a vote. I move that the Finance Committee recommend favorable action, and this is where I gotta get my wording back here. I move that the Finance Committee recommend favorable action on Article 1, which is budget appropriation for the amount listed, $19,798,600 to defray town expenses for FY20.
I'll second.
Thanks, David. Any thoughts or questions? This is what we've kind of boiled down here. This is all our work over the past 3 months, and I think we know full well what's in here, and we sure hope this passes. All right, if no other discussion, we'll move to a vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Great. 5-0, FinCom, Article 1. On to free cash. Not a great situation to have the structural deficit, 700,000. Last year was more, right, technically, because we paid for some capital with additional free cash, so we're stuck using that right now with our levy limit constraints and projected expenditures in excess of revenues. So we can't subsidize the tax rate as we prefer to with free cash. We expect that number is going to continue to come down, but for FY20, we're still looking to put 700,000 towards the budget. Anything else you'd add to that, Patty?
No, it's strictly to balance the budget.
Yeah, yep, that's all it's there for. So I'll establish a motion. I move that the FinCom recommend favorable action. Should I say, is it a town meeting? Catherine, is that good?
Yep.
Okay. Okay, that the FinCom recommend favorable action to town meeting on Article 2, which is the use of free cash to balance the budget in the amount of $700,000. Is there a second?
Second.
Great, thanks, Carrie. No, thanks, Mike. Okay, any other questions, comments?
Quick
Of course,
question.
yes.
Does the 700,000 stay in the motion? So it's typically,
It doesn't, it
what-
won't stay in the
it won't-
printed
to
motion.
what,
Yeah.
to see what sum of money and the dollar amount is and enunciate it.
They're placeholders for us now, basically, yeah,
Right.
yeah.
Right, I just wanted to be
You're
clear
right,
about that.
you're right. It's,
Mhm.
yeah, it's really just the article
It's
name,
for,
the
right,
name, the number and name that really matters.
but it may be
for-
asked,
yeah,
it can
for
be
purposes.
asked. I don't think it ever has been
Yeah.
though.
Well, it's in the warrant book as well, right? So, I mean, the
will
budget's
be,
there.
The amount,
The amount's there, but not in the we won't
Yeah,
read it in
doesn't say
the
like
article.
recommends or
Yeah,
it has like a,
it'll be in
right.
the commentary.
Mhm.
The figure will be in the commentary.
Right. Okay. I'll establish the motion for Article 3.
We didn't vote on-
Oh, we didn't vote, sorry.
Nope.
Yeah, no,
We were almost there.
I know, right?
You got a motion in a second.
Yep, I have a motion and a second on
Yeah.
Article 2. Any other discussion or questions now? Okay, then we'll move to a vote. All in favor?
Alex, may I comment? I don't think the
Yes,
selectmen
Catherine.
are calling them Article 1, 2, and 3 yet.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Right.
That was a good
So just
catch.
by name, yeah,
Yes,
thank you.
I remember
Yeah,
them talking about that last night.
good. Super important for the later ones. I think those two are pretty well established, but, so I don't think we need to go back and do those, do you? Okay.
Yeah.
Point.
No, that's
Although, I mean, there
good point.
was discussion about moving this big chunk later on
Saying
to keep people there.
Yeah, I don't think that, I think they also spoke in favor of kind of keeping them clustered
Yeah.
from the standpoint of not confusing people by putting like a school override towards the tail end in
Yeah.
hopes that it would keep quorum. I think we're okay for those two anyway. But for Article 3, in establishing the motion, which I'll do now, I will move that the FinCom recommend favorable action to town meeting for the article Hamilton Wenham Regional School District Operating Override Number 1.
Second.
Thanks, David. Okay, so this is for, of course, roughly $500,000, so that's netting out that which will be in Article 4, the additional 116,000 and change, to fund the portion, Wenham's portion of the assessment up to the school's level services budget. Any thoughts or questions or comments people like to share?
Just a comment. I think it'll be important, and I suspect that the superintendent and the chief financial officer of the schools will enunciate this. But I think it's important for the community to understand that this is a level service. This $500,000 is level services.
Right.
And that should be broken down so that the community understands what drives that 500,000 for us and the other 900,000 for Hamilton.
It does have one piece, though, that was considered an increase of over level services, which is the additional out-of-district placement funds.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Which is driven by statute.
Oh, yeah, I just am clarifying, yeah. Well, yeah, it's not necessarily driven by statute, but,
Chapter 766.
I am planning on voting favorable action on this, although it's similar to last year. There's still a lot of structural issues that the school district is contending with. It's putting a lot of pressure on their budget, some of which they have little control over. But I still, plan to vote favorable action. But as we discussed at some of the joint meetings with the school committee and the district's administrative staff, encourage the school to engage in a comprehensive strategic plan to help develop some prioritization when we have these situations where we have to cut, and even doing level services is difficult. Exploring opportunities to get increased state funding where possible, like through the reevaluation of the funding formula. Also, there's I don't have a lot of detail on this, but it seems like there's been an increase in the administrative funding for administrative staff and administrative purposes, and I think that's worth looking at closer. But that being said, I still plan on voting favorable action, and I don't think a lot of these issues that we're contending with that put all the pressure on the budget can be resolved in 1 year or 2 years, as it were, since I've been paying close attention. And I do agree with, it's 3 is related to 4, and I agree with separating it out.
Yeah, I think that was the right move to break out the articles tonight. And I think for the reason that those are above level services, and Jim, to your point, that this is making sure that everyone knows that this is level services only. Now, it's also a meaningful increase to the town. I mean, when you have level services operating increases of 5% plus per year, not factoring in the split, of course, right? That in and of itself is a major issue for something that's now over half our town's budget. It's eating up our levy capacity at rates that are unsustainable, and it's why we're in this position, which is why it's a school which is why the BOS have put in place a school operating override versus funding it all and calling it a town operating override.
That's a good point, Alex, because I think for the community to understand level services, but at that rate of increase. What does that mean for 5 years from now?
Right.
21, 22.
Right.
And that it's a structural issue that this community, Wenham's going to have to contend with going forward.
If there's an affordability problem, it's not for rampant new programs above level services, which frankly I think community members would, not rampant, right, would like to see investments, additional investments in our kids' educations. And as I mentioned at one of the school committee meetings, these aren't the type of, OPEB and SRO are not the type of investments that the administration, I think, would want to make, right? I think they would want to invest in educational programs. Neither of those are educational at their heart. Now, that isn't to say that they don't have their merits, but it's not the basis of what professional educators do. They don't go to say, oh yeah, I want to set up an OPEB trust fund someday, or have an SRO. And yet, I think it's really important, and back to your point, that the residents of our community in Hamilton too, as I'm sure they'll be informed, really understand that these increases year over year in just the level of services, just eking by, or essentially not furthering from a capital planning I'll get to in a minute, not providing a long-term strategic vision. Carrie, if you've encouraged them extensively and many, taking the opportunity to, on a couple of occasions, kind of encourage the school committee and administration, more so the school committee, to think longer term, and offered them, having done research and homework on your own with another district, that you reached out to. Was it Woburn?
Woburn,
As to how to think about a plan, the need for it, right? Describe the need for it, how to think about that, and show them examples and how it can benefit their approach to both managing the budget, crafting the budget. That's a big part of their responsibility, but also understanding what type of programs are really benefiting, students and
absolutely.
the like, and with an eye on long-term infrastructure and the like. I don't know. I don't know if you've kind of had other follow-ups on that, or if you've heard back from the school committee, or if they're taking steps.
So
or
I owe
have
the
you,
school committee a summary of the information that I found.
Okay.
Yeah. But I think the bottom
that was
line is
great.
just not, it's not just about, I did couch it earlier, is how to make tough decisions, and a strategic plan helps when you have, limited budget for what your needs and wants are. But it's more than that. It's also helping get a good value as well for the tax dollars, as well as, just an excellent education, cutting edge for our kids. And there was a list circulated of above-level services requests that are not in the budget that you recall, I think. And some of those items are, really, I think, valuable items would be worth having, like a more integrated robotics program in the high school, instead of just having an after-school club, having it integrated more into the curriculum, a clinical psychologist. There's lots of stuff on that list that are, important and worthy. It's just not affordable at this point.
Right.
In addition to that list, there was also at least one page of deferred
Oh, yeah, the capital, yeah.
capital improvements. We have 3 buildings, if you count Bucher. Winthrop is 50 years old, Cutler is 35 or 45 years old, I don't know for sure. And Bucher is probably 65 years old. There was a significant amount of capital requests that were deferred, weren't even put forward. So I think that's another issue, whether we make the community aware of that. I think that's the school committee's
You're
task.
talking but weren't put forward as a debt exclusion, or weren't
not.
right.
We're not.
Right.
We're not, but they're out there.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of capital issues that both communities are facing, quite frankly, with the school buildings.
Well, sure. And what's unfortunate is that, sorry,
Yeah.
I'll let you finish.
Yeah, and what are the potential associated costs with that in this long-term strategic plan? That's all.
And there isn't one. There's a complete absence, complete lack and void of any plan as it relates to their capital expenditures. And that was made clear through meetings and requests to understand where they're at and what their charge is with respect to prioritizing. Because having a list of things that you need is all well and good, but just, it's the same list we saw last year, more or less. And just a list of current needs isn't a long-term.
Yeah, and in discussion
plan.
between the school committee and the district staff, it was, could you give us, one group asked the other group, could you give us prioritization and what is of greatest need? And then the other group will say, well, we're waiting on you to give us that advice. So it's just this circular discussion.
Ultimately, the finance director said they don't have a plan, which is why I feel confident saying they don't have a plan. And but those are very real needs. I mean, whether it's $800,000 of chairs and desks, I don't know, or pots and pans, or curbs and sidewalks and ramps, all that stuff is needed at some point. I definitely agree. And how can you plan as their entity responsible for the budget, or the recipients of the assessments, member communities trying to formulate their own plan if you don't know. So I think, and largely at Hamilton's urging, there's a kind of a joint kind of capital, I don't want to say planning approach, but at least an awareness, at least sharing, our capital plan with Hamilton, which has been done before. I think we've got pretty good relationships with respect to understanding where we are in each other's capital planning cycles, but also to bring the schools into the fold too, because I really do hope that they take the opportunity to kind of develop a longer term strategy. And I mean, as it relates to the level services budget, a lot of it is, of course, contractual.
Oh,
There's,
yeah.
You know, the vast majority of the increases.
60% of the budget is salaries,
Salaries and.
which is
Um,
well worth it, yep.
Yeah, exactly. And you want, you need to be competitive in lots of respects to have a competitive school system. And you hope that you're not too high in the rank, but you also need to be right in that right spot. And we've asked about metrics as well, or I've asked about metrics to try and understand just at a high level kind of where our school systems fit in relative to others.
I have a clarification question about the capital planning coordination that's happening. Is the idea just to have a sense of what's on the radar screen the next few years?
I
Or
think
is there
that's-
any opportunity to have economies of scale and, shared capital?
I think you'd identify opportunities for savings along the way just by, at a minimum, first establishing who needs what and when roughly. And I think that's the first step. There are probably some, but maybe not glaringly obvious opportunities. Like I know it's been talked about before, like what about IT, for example?
Yep.
We have shared IT, but I think some of them seem to not play out as with as much benefit, as much bang for the buck, or from a service standpoint, or operational efficiency, not, might save a little bit of money, but be more hassle, less efficient or vice versa.
Okay.
So, but I would hope that those would come to bear. Sort of like with Hamilton with the joint inspectional system, right? I mean, that only works when you reach out and say, hey, we're thinking about this, and here are our needs. Do you have similar needs? And what other communities nearby, be it Hamilton or Essex or Manchester, like where can we partner up? As Jackie did with inspectional. So, yeah, I mean, in general, as it relates to the level services budget, I will be voting favorably for it as well. I don't have any strong reason to oppose it otherwise. I mean, I would on the basis of process, if I felt that there was something problematic in their process as it relates to their level services budget that the school committee has put forward. I think their process still should be more transparent and deliberative. I think there should be more time spent discussing and deliberating the bulk of the budget. It's a $30 million budget, and the time spent on openly kind of discussing and with lots of varying viewpoints, deliberating on changes that could or should not be made within the level services, for example, or within the above level services asks. I think could be bolstered. I think they could take that opportunity to provide even more to the communities about how they could sharpen the pencils, how you could bring up as an opportunity to discuss a program that isn't beneficial, right? Maybe there's something that they should be discussing that you could cut from the budget and make an investment elsewhere, or perhaps realize the net savings. I'd like to see more of that. Those are my general thoughts.
I think what also needs to be highlighted in the level service budget is what Carrie was saying, that I think the number is, I don't have it in front of me, 896,000 for additional out of district placements.
Yep. So
That is one of the biggest drivers, along with the OPEB,
right.
that's impacting the budget.
And last year, I think generally we were all supportive of their investment, and I'd like to see, speaking of kind of bringing forth information to the communities proactively through the finance committees, and or anyone else in their meetings, to basically show the net impact of those investments over time.
But I don't want to belabor this, but there was a presentation by the school committee and the director of special ed on this, and I didn't know it, and if I did, I really would have gone. I really would have been interested in hearing what drives that 896. Not to say that it's falsified or created, but I think that's another significant issue that needs to be understood by the communities. How it's done, does it belong on town meeting floor? I'm not suggesting that necessarily, but that is a significant issue for the two communities.
Yeah, I have a comment about that. At one of the joint meetings, we were talking about this and looking at ways to, you know, get good value for your money and provide an excellent education, I had asked, for example, would the early screening for learning disabilities law that just passed in Massachusetts, if you're screening kindergartners and remediating them early, are you going to have a savings later on? Because I mean, it's proven and researched that the longer you wait to remediate a lot of these disabilities, the longer it takes and the more it costs. And I respectfully disagree with Superintendent Harvey when he said that the school's already doing that. I think that there could be more done in terms of early identification and effective remediation. And if that's done, it can save money later down the road. Which I know they already did this program, implemented this year in the high school, to try and keep kids in-house rather than going elsewhere. But again, that's in high school, so if some of these issues are addressed earlier, the kids can be mainstreamed and not need these.
Again, not to belabor it, but they do have a very significant program at the Winthrop. It's quite significant for disabled kids.
Yes, there's a lot being done
There's a
that's
lot being
good.
done in-house.
There's also more that can be done.
More be done?
Yes.
Awesome, sure.
And it would require a more of an upfront investment perhaps than what's happening now. But I do believe, as borne out in other school districts and multiple research studies, that over the long term, you may not see the savings for 5-10 years, that it can make a difference. So that's an example of zooming out and strategically looking at things. And trying to get a better value for your money as well as getting a better education for kids.
Okay, any other thing anyone would like to add? If not, we can go to a vote. I did establish a motion for the article, and was seconded. Okay, all right, we'll move to a vote then. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Is that unanimous?
It was,
Yes.
Catherine, thanks, yeah. Yeah, of course, yeah, take your time. Okay, I'll establish a motion. I move that FinCom recommend favorable action to town meeting on the article for the Hamilton Wenham Regional School District operating override number 2, this being for the OPEB and school resource officer.
Second.
Thanks, Mike. Okay, so as we discussed, this is for roughly $116,000, which is our share of the two above level services asks. And we've talked a little bit about kind of, I think the easier one for me, SRO, not just because it's smaller, but because I don't think there's really a real clear understanding across the two member towns and the administration and school committee as to not so much whether or not there's a need, not whether or not it's warranted. I think there's support for and probably against the SRO insofar as it's whether or not it's a role that belongs in the schools or is beneficial or detrimental. I don't have a particularly strong or informed view on it philosophically. It isn't to say I don't care. I think I would probably formulate one with ease, if a strong opinion that is, if I got past the point of, well, who's paying for this and what, and we've got two parties who are basically proposing that they each pay for it, and it just seems like a non-starter, and it kind of has been ever since it was suggested back on January the 2nd. Oh, by the way, Jim, that I meant to mention that January 2nd meeting, the school committee's on YouTube, and that's the special ed presentation. It was Stacy, I don't recall her last name, but she,
Busick.
Stacy Busick, that's right.
It was excellent.
Yeah, and she has a really thorough slide deck that presents everything clearly and
Right.
well.
It's in the packet.
Yeah,
Yep.
it's in the packet. You can find the link to on the school committee
Thank you.
webpage.
So, yeah, you could watch that, and also the OPEB as well, which I'm sure we'll talk about in a minute. But, yeah, for me, it's just, it doesn't quite make any sense. I don't understand structurally how it would work, and not, you know, philosophically opposed to an SRO, but don't see the need for the school to fund it. Now, I do recall, and I'll mention, in the school committee vote on the budget, they had, I think, not quite the votes for the budget as it stood, as was recommended by the administration, which is level services plus these two. But then they talked about some changes, and then they ultimately did pass it without any changes.
I think the vote was 5-2.
5-2,
In
that's right.
favor of the full.
Oh, there
budget.
were motions to amend it and
Yeah.
change. They kicked around
We kicked around.
for a
but-
little bit, like
but at the end of
cutting
the
OPEB.
day,
Yeah, that's right.
it was a full 5-2 in support of the full.
Certainly, they ultimately supported it. Thank you, Jim. I was thinking earlier where there was discussion as to whether or not there was,
We're going back and forth.
yeah, exactly, enough back and forth. So, and that kind of, you know, not that it really matters what the number was, they passed it, but, I don't know, I think that needs to be settled in terms of whether it's, for me, whether it's, you know, Hamilton or the schools or what. And it's not for not wanting to pay for it. I mean, we couldn't afford it either way.
That's
But
funny.
it's
I know
not.
They're arguing how to pay for it, not to pay for it. You know what I mean? It's,
Yeah, yeah.
But it's a good problem, and I interrupted you, so
No,
we're coming full circle.
go right ahead.
I'm glad, as a resident, OPEB is being addressed, whether we agree with the total, or we have to change it every year. It's been kicked down the curb, or kicked down the street enough that, as most people know, the longer you wait on a liability, the more it's gonna cost later on. Whether it's $250, $250 a million, and it goes up, or like what you did in town, start small and add a little bit much every year. I think having something in there, it just has to be done. If we ever go single payer in the country, maybe that amends it, but there's not anything else really that I can think of that's gonna make this go away or get smaller. The numbers could change. You can maybe start with 100, then go 150 and have a longer incubation period, but those of us who've looked at charts or actuarial charts know the curve eventually gets smaller and smaller, so I'm okay with it.
Do you have a few specifics for the 89 on OPEB? More of a breakout? I don't remember.
Oh,
what
the
it was.
89,
Oh,
the 89,000, it's,
it's our portion of the
It's our
250, I
portion of
think.
250,000.
250, right?
yeah, it's roughly a third of the 250,000.
Gotcha.
So they're looking to establish with a one-time fund, because they can only appropriate these funds for an OPEB trust at town meeting, or in the school budget. Of course, well, that gets passed at town meeting indirectly or directly, but yeah, during their school budget process. So that's our portion of it for the FY20 ask.
And more next year and more next year.
Yeah, that's the problem.
That's the crux of it. Yeah, I know there were funding scenarios. I think 8 funding scenarios were, I mean, that's, obviously you're gonna have lots of different funding scenarios when you project out different kind of funding rates, levels of funding and different discount rates, which is, exceedingly low, but, justified, I suppose, via not having the assets now on which to base any, there's no investment mix, there's no asset allocation to evaluate now to come up with a reasonable rate of, expected rate of return which is the primary kind of input to this, right? So I think it was somewhere in the low 3s. I just rewatched it and I should remember more clearly, but that is the OPEB presentation from the second. So I don't think that the funding rate is entirely arbitrary. With that said, you're not going to fund your way out of it, and it's such a big hit at a point where we don't have the levy capacity for it now, let alone in the next 3 years, where it goes from 250 to 5 to 750 to 1 to 1 1/4 and stays at that level. Looking at our levy limit increases, I think,
5% this year.
yeah, I mean, from 18 to 19, total levy limit increased from 14,161 to 15,134. Is that right?
Yeah, 380.
That's inclusive of the override, of course, 331,000. But normally it was like 600,000, basically, from 16 to 17, it's 400,000.
No, 320,
Total levy limit I'm looking at.
okay.
Are you looking at the one in the packet, because that did break it, we did break it out in the one in the
So it'd be
packet.
329,000, right? With the 2% increase?
Show me where you're looking.
Yeah,
2.5% increase.
right there, so would
Yep.
that be levy limit increase per year?
Yeah.
So I
Well,
think to your,
yeah, but then you would add like new growth to everything. So I'm not talking about just the 2.5, the Prop 2.5 increase
Okay.
to it, but how much is the total levy limit increase, I guess? Because like, you know, you'd factor in the override, for example. Not that you want to have those for purposes of increasing it.
but it wipes away almost.
Yeah. So to your point, under Prop 2.5, yeah, we have like 350, let's call it, right? That we can increase, and then whatever new growth there is, basically, is what it boils down to. Patty, what's new growth incremental? Oh, no,
What we did was, we broke this out a little bit for fiscal 19 to kind of show you where everything went. So we had originally put $100,000 for new growth. It
Yeah.
ended up becoming, it was the 187 we had talked about. It ended up becoming 287, so we said the incremental was 187.
got it.
Then the override, which got us with our total levy limit, which we drove up to this year, and then built it from that one.
Right, right. So if you had, for example, if we were in, a few years down the road, we're at 750, and we have, 250, that's ours at a third, right? I mean, that's only 3 years from now. If you were to move forward with that funding schedule, then that would basically be half our, or more,
Mhm.
of our levy limit increase. It would occupy it, with abandon, basically. And it would obviously crowd out, it would more than crowd out. The school's in a position now where they can, present essentially what is a level services budget. I mean, if you take out OPEB, and the SRO, I mean, there's no new educational programs or anything like that. I mean, this would, on their side, I suspect, crowd out basically any asks, given the position that at least Wenham is in. Granted, Hamilton may not be in the same exact position, but, so I think, I feel as though that the rate of funding is more aggressive than it can be. Not that it needs to be. I mean, if that's your goal, 30 years, 32 years, whatever, to basically be fully funded, which changes every year, right, with actuarial evaluations. I mean, it changes nonstop, right, in terms of.
Changes quarterly.
Right,
Usually.
right.
We look at it, yeah.
With that said, I, as I've mentioned before, I think, it's fiscally responsible to address it because it is our member communities, and in Wenham, our taxpayers are left ultimately with that, our share of the $35 million liability that they have today. On the town side, we're obviously just kind of taking a very small incremental approach with $50,000 in this year's operating budget. And I don't know what that number is, but as you pointed out, they kind of deferred on this for a long time and didn't do anything where we wanted them to, I think, safe to say, and Hamilton in particular wanted them to. But I don't think the rate at which this would be coming down the line in the next 5 years would be workable within the confines of our budget.
I agree.
I think, my opinion on Article 4 is not to support it as it's written, as it's defined.
Yeah, I agree with that. That's how I'm kind of leaning.
Not as it's written, but given the consideration of the numbers,
Yeah.
and the SRO position is so soft in terms of its future funding, I think I would not support Article 4.
We allowed to table this until the SRO is figured out? No?
I don't,
Will be.
Because the
I
numbers would
wouldn't,
change.
I wouldn't hold out any hope for that being resolved. I think it's been made very clear that on the school side, the administration, and with the voting support of the school committee having voted for this recommendation by the administration to have it be a line item on the district budget, is expecting to fund the position for FY20. And there's talk about some maybe back and forth with Hamilton still, but I mean, it's been ever since the presentation on the 2nd, where it was, we plan on paying for this with our impact fee from whatever it is, Green Acres or whatever the weed place is.
Green Meadows.
Green Meadows, and, maybe they get the money, maybe they don't. I think you can quickly go down that path of, right, like, well, what if it's not successful? That's not germane to the discussion. It's whether or not it should even be on their budget if Hamilton is saying that they will cover it. And we could have an IMA with Hamilton as well. We could pay our share through Hamilton if it gets down to that level, but it doesn't feel well baked at all to me. It feels like it's
No pun intended.
very no pun intended this time. It feels very in an awkward state of just kind of this unresolved state of confusion. Maybe it's just me that's confused. That's entirely possible. Jackie?
Well, I think too, the other thing, just to your point too, is that tonight is the goal of the recommendations that would be printed in the warrant book. You do always have the option of choosing to make a recommendation on the floor of town meeting, but then it won't be publicized and printed in the version that goes out to all the households. So I think that's just a process consideration I wanted to make you aware of.
Do you put a line in there that the FinCom defers to, deferred until town meeting?
Recommendation
We
to
did that last
TBD
year.
at town
Yeah.
meeting.
Yeah,
Right,
I mean,
yeah,
that-
we did that
yeah.
last year on a couple things. I'm comfortable voting on it tonight.
As am I. What did we defer on last year? Which one was it?
Debt exclusion.
Yeah, debt exclusion.
Is that
Debt
one?
Was it the
exclusion
Winthrop?
and maybe,
No, the other one.
was it the 2 ballot question related articles maybe that you determined maybe the day of?
Yeah, we
It's definitely
met
the debt.
before.
It's a good question. We had a
Yeah,
meeting beforehand.
right.
Will you grab the budget book?
No, that's
You
okay.
okay with
Thank you. I was just curious offhand. Yeah, that's right. We could defer, but I'm comfortable not deferring. I don't think the material in this article is going to change anyway. I don't think there's, the dollar amounts there. And of course, that's subject to the 5% plus year-over-year operating increase anyway. And that's one of the initial concerns I had with SRO. If it were to be in there temporarily, that's one thing. Stripping it out seems like it's unlikely. It would just be kind of a permanent place, I think, on the operating budget, as would any entity have it there, basically.
I'll say my thought on why I'm voting for it. I think going forward, the math needs to be amended, but for me, there needs to be something in the budget to start the process, and you can amend the numbers.
For OPEB or
for OPEB.
Okay.
Sorry, for OPEB. It's been kicked down so long, I don't know if it doesn't pass now, will it not come up again for a few years, and then what happens to that number now? So at least having some sort of deposit for years in the budget at least lowers liabilities for future years. If an override doesn't pass for next year, at least there's something in the budget addressing OPEB. It might not be the increases, but there's something in there to fund the liabilities. Because again, some warrants come up every year, some don't. Debt exclusions come. We are cutting too close to the bone on the services in the town. As I mentioned before in other meetings, and looking at ripping the Band-Aid and maybe doing more overrides. But from a resident's perspective, a finance committee member perspective, having something in the budget, whether or not inclusive of whether or not future years are sustainable at the level presented, having something in there initially is, I think, more beneficial than not. So that's the reason why I would think. Everyone's point is valid, and to me, that there's always it's a negative, right? Overrides are always a negative, but at least having something in there to start with is for me is the reason I'll be voting yes.
I agree with what you're saying, although I'm going to be voting unfavorable for this one, just because I think it's reasonable to say, can you come back with there were multiple scenarios, but can you come back with a different option that might be more realistic for Wenham's budget outlook the next, down the road. And then also, I know it's an actuarial standard to have a 30-year time frame, but
Depends on the term.
is it possible to just, this is why, could it be 40
You
years?
can do whatever you want.
Yeah.
You can do whatever you want. You can put a buck in it, you can put nothing in it, as I've done. I mean, I think, so
Because all the
Otis.
funding scenarios were 30, and I think Wenham's is 30. But Wenham's has a significant
Yeah.
increase when the pension liabilities reduce.
Right.
And I don't know about.
The schools would
s-
do the same. Yeah, they would fund, they
It
would take that
does-
money and shift
is
it
there a
over in a
bump
bunch
up?
of years, and the
Okay.
pensions reduced it, yeah.
Um, So, that's one example of
Mhm.
just take, another pass at it to see if it's feasible.
I think it is. I think you can run the numbers how long you want. But if there's transition changes or staffing changes between school management and everything else, you don't know when it's going to be addressed again. And so that's my thought. What I prefer, whether it's, if it's, say it gets reduced to 200,000 or 150,000, we're still going to need an override to pay for it.
No doubt, no
So
doubt.
that's why. So
We would, and I think that's a logical question, like, if I didn't support the rate of increase, what would I support? And that's why I said it's sufficiently arbitrary,
No.
because it doesn't need to be
Yeah.
30, there's no, obviously, legal requirement that you fund at any particular amount. I do trust the actuarial analysis that was done. Odyssey Advisors performs our OPEB actuarial analysis as well, and is presented to us in our grade.
Didn't Rockland Trust do theirs?
No, Rockland Trust would be their investment advisor. They're kind of,
So-
they're bundling the whole thing as a package, right?
Did
So
they
it's-
do an Odyssey actuarial thing? Because this is October 25th. And it wasn't clear that Odyssey had run funding scenarios for the Hamilton Wenham Regional School District proposal. Do you remember that email we got from Peter?
Vaguely, but not.
So
not
I
for
remember the
general.
Rockland Trust scenarios, but I don't remember other actuarial, can you say that 10 times fast? Scenarios, like from Odyssey, for example.
No, I don't know. But they were, I mean, their presentation provided the basic
Yeah.
summary level
Yes,
view of the different
and multiple options.
outcomes,
Yep.
right. But and Rockland Trust is that's just the investment advisor, that it's like any bank RA that's basically going to take the $250,000 and invest it according to some investment policy statement for a fee. I would like to see, in a spirit of kind of digging into the details more. I mean, OPEB is incredibly complex. It would be good to see a greater level of kind of detailed questioning, I think, too, on the part of the school committee who are going to be in charge of this, who are going to own this policy. Because remember, I started to say it's like a bundled package. It's the analysis that is used to support a potential plan of action and one of the funding options in particular. And then it's how do you invest the monies and with whom? And that was suggested as well, but that's a separate discussion entirely, right? That I think the school committee would really want to delve into. And then the policy that would go along with it, which is, I don't want to say it would encumber, because you can't compel the future year's school committees to do exactly this. You can't say, hey, if we all vote yay, they're going to have to do 500, then 750, and so on.
Correct.
But they can, but the policy would be designed to, preclude the changes, basically, right? Or to prohibit, I should say, some changes, or at least kind of hold them to it, which is by design, if that's what you want, if that's the right thing, that's what you want, but it might make it trickier, in my estimation, to kind of, to fall back on a lower level if it proves unsustainable, which I think there's a meaningful likelihood of it being. But I don't,
It's a fair point.
but I don't know what that right level is. There were, I want to say it was halved as a suggestion in an amended motion, and perhaps amended motion during the school committee to kind of cut it down in half. And yes, we're going to need an override either way, but where we're so lean on the town side, I'd like to see it reduced while being addressed.
I got it. So you would like it reduced or addressed and reduced is why you're voting no. Right?
Yes, so coupled with, frankly, if I supported the OPEB 100%, which I do not,
Yeah.
I would still be voting no on the basis of SRO.
Got it.
to be
basis of it?
clear.
Because it's not, that
Because
hasn't
it's one
worked out.
article.
Got it.
This is
Right.
challenging for us
Yeah.
because
Yep.
it is one article.
Yeah.
It is one article, and with,
And it's
yep.
got two very different considerations.
Yeah.
It has absolutely
And-
different
and the
considerations, yep.
And when I say I wouldn't support it, I wouldn't support it because the SRO is so soft at this point in terms of where the funding potentially
Right.
can come from that. And David, I would agree with you that, but the money is here. The money's been voted on by the school committee, but an incremental, less aggressive number, I might be able to support. But however, given that it's coupled with the SRO, it
So
makes it very
this
difficult.
is where it warrants,
No.
you know, maybe stating one more time. I think we all know this, so forgive me for repeating myself, but, you know, those who are watching, especially any school committee members, saying, we wouldn't necessarily cut that from the budget, even if you said no. And of course,
Yeah, yeah.
that's what, but the point of this is to call out that tremendous expense that the town is on the hook for, should the OPEB policy and trust fund be established with the plan to fund it and the corresponding rate in the policy set as forth, be up against for the next 30 years. And it's well beyond what we can afford, unfortunately. And but that's well known, obviously, to the schools, right? It's not like, that will be a surprise. So I think it's prudent for us as our, you know, residents, tax dollar kind of stewards to just say, look, this is the right, and I would say that addressing the OPEB lack of funding, as we have asked for, you know, for them to do for years, is appropriate. Our approach to 50,000 we've got a $5 million liability, right? So it's much smaller than theirs, but we're only on the hook for 1/3 of theirs, technically speaking, right? So if you've got, you know, 35, you're talking 12. Okay, if we're on the hook for 12 of that, and we've got 5 on the town side, well, that's order of 2x, maybe, you know, even go to 3x, right? So if we're doing 50 on the town side, you know, is 150 too much? No, it's probably more or less in line, right? It's kind of, it has that feel of being kind of close, but the ramp up,
It's
I think
tough.
would kill us in 21, 22, 23, and as best I can tell, it's not coming down. It'll put us in an exceedingly difficult position with much larger overrides, given that this year's Article 3 override is already nearly 2x what it was.
Last year.
Actually, sorry, combined 3 and 4 are roughly twice what they were last year. But all valid points that you make, David.
You have valid points too.
Did you suggest, wrong word, but did you put on the table a defer action alternative?
No, that's not on the table.
That's not
The
on the
table
table.
was to discuss that article.
Certainly can.
It's a different motion.
Right, we could amend the motion,
Okay, so a
To-
motion has
to-
been made.
correct.
Oh,
To vote favorable
To
action.
to vote,
Vote
right, to
favorable.
vote favorable action, right.
So you're voting for, the motion was for favorable action
Oh,
for that
okay,
article.
I'm sorry, I lost that over the
It's
top.
okay.
Well,
Just-
so-
It's all right.
So we'd get there anyway, because as we move closer to vote, we'd be talking about the direction of the favorable v. unfavorable policy as we kick these around. You remember last year, we changed 6 times the direction of the motion, were a couple of them, because we were trying to think about the clearest way to indicate what our recommended course of action was, and do you go,
Yeah.
negative to favorable? But Jim, if you're asking if we could change it to defer action to town meeting, we could. I personally am not inclined to defer, but that does not mean that we couldn't vote to do so. If there's a motion to, right?
I'm not making that motion.
Okay, but just want to be clear, we could
Yep.
certainly,
Yep.
yeah. Shall we move to a vote?
Sure.
And the sense of so last year we did, I think, vote for unfavorable. So, what?
You don't
You
wanna
made the
change that.
motion.
Yeah.
We don't want to change it?
Favorable, and if we have 0 favorable, then by
Right.
The motion
default,
stands.
The motion
But
stands.
now you're voting for favorable action, so if you're not in favor of it, don't vote for it.
Right, exactly. right. The motion stands, but we could change the motion. We could,
But then I think that makes
Okay.
it confusing with the
What-
No, you
recommendations.
can add a recommendation, but you wouldn't want to change this motion.
oh, no, I don't mean the motion. I mean the recommendation. I mean the motion to vote. We could change the motion to provide unfavorable action, right?
Why don't we just
Isn't that what we
do
did last year? No?
Why don't we
We
do
did,
that?
we did go back and forth and back and
Why don't
forth.
we do that?
In my
Okay.
opinion, it's clear just to keep it the way it is. Just
I
keep it
don't disagree. I don't disagree. I'm
favorable
just trying to be,
action, and
okay.
if it's, 2 to 5, that means, or 2 to 3,
Right,
that's 2
exactly.
favorable,
Fair
3
enough.
unfavorable.
Fair enough. Yep,
But
yep.
we
No,
did-
keep it as is. Yeah,
We did go
definitely.
back
I
and
just want to
forth
make
a
sure
lot
that we're
last
not,
year,
yeah,
because
yeah.
it was, and there was some other.
Maybe because I brought us back and forth.
Well, I mean, I think the board was
So shut up, Al.
change back and forth too.
It's hard to
Okay.
vote that
No
way, 'cause
problem.
you're voting.
It absolutely is, in the negative.
Would you like what you settled on last year, though, for the,
For 3,
yeah, so it
Please.
was, the Finance and Advisory Committee do not recommend favorable action,
Right.
4 to 0 to 0.
that's what I was looking for.
But
Thank
you
you.
didn't change that?
No.
That is in the warrant book on the website.
Yeah, it
It's
was,
so confusing.
I don't,
But doesn't,
So
you
the
don't think
motion's
that
fine, you just
Yeah, yeah.
wouldn't,
Yeah.
you just won't recommend it, if that's the way it goes,
of course,
yeah.
of course. Okay, yep. Okay. So again, the motion is to recommend favorable action. Any other thoughts on, I'm obviously fine with leaving the motion as is, but the article in general before we vote. Okay.
So we're keeping the language as it is here, or
Correct.
going with what we did
No.
last year?
No.
What
We'll
was-
keep
what he
it
said.
as is, yeah.
Okay.
If we had to change it, we could always huddle and change it
But
later.
I think you're doing what you did last year, if I'm.
No,
No, we're not.
No,
No, we're not.
no, we're not.
Then there's a motion on the floor to recommend favorable action
Right.
at town meeting.
Right,
But in the wording of the warrant book, you could say to Catherine that you want us to reflect any negative favorable action votes as do not recommend favorable action in the wording. Is that what you want?
No.
I
You-
don't.
The motion on the table
Is to.
is as is,
Right.
to vote for favorable action.
Yep.
Vote on, yes, you do, or no, you don't.
Correct.
Correct.
That's the vote.
But when it's reflected in the book, in
How
print.
about we do
It
the
has to-
vote first before you worry about what's in the book?
Okay.
But yeah, I don't think you can change the motion itself in the book, right?
No, you can't change the motion.
Oh, but the
it's just
commentary
it's just
piece?
do you want it to say recommendation of the Finance and Advisory Committee favorable 0 to 4 to 0, or do you want it to say
Got it.
do not recommend?
Understood.
4 to
We can
0?
figure all that out later
Yeah.
with
Mhm.
consistency with
Whatever you want,
BOS
yeah.
and how, yeah, we're jumping ahead, but
Yeah,
thank
no,
you.
of course.
Yep, yep. Thank
Just
you,
so that
Mike.
I just wanna
Yep.
make sure it's
Yeah, yeah.
clear, so that what you want is in there.
Okay.
We don't know what we want.
call for question, Mr. Chairman?
Okay. All in favor? All opposed? Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Cemeteries. We're voting all 12 tonight, correct?
Huh?
Right, all 12? Okay.
Yes. We're through the more, trickier
Time-consuming
ones, more
yeah.
time
More
consuming.
meaty ones.
Thanks, Gary. Cemetery and other trust funds.
That's standard operating procedure.
yeah,
Yep.
this is just a perfunctory
Mm.
article.
Right. I move that FinCom recommend favorable action to town meeting for the article cemetery and other trust funds.
Second.
Thank you, David. This is basically to cover the cost of maintaining the cemeteries, right?
Mhm.
No, this
It's
isn't
just
the
trust
roundabout DPW to
Trust
cemetery?
funds. It's just the
Oh, this is trust fund,
It's just the
okay.
trust funds, yeah.
Yep,
The
okay.
next one's the,
Oh, that's right, that's the maintenance one, thank you, next, yep. Yeah, this is perfunctory. Any other thoughts or questions? No?
No.
Okay, hearing none, we'll go to a vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Next is currently Article 6, may or may not be later, cemetery maintenance fund transfer to withdraw some money not to exceed $7,500 from the sale of cemetery lots. Received for appropriation amount July 19 to June 30, 2020, transferred deposit said funds in general fund. This is for that DPW maintenance.
Yep, and the
Yeah.
cemetery commission, the number's kind of squishy because they're voting tonight, but it's just, you can still just recommend
Yeah,
that.
of course, yeah, I won't state the number, okay. I move that FinCom recommend favorable action to town meeting for the Article Cemetery Maintenance Fund Transfer.
Second?
Thanks, Jim. Any other questions, thoughts? No? Okay, move to vote, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Next up is Chapter 90 funding for road work. Now, the 7th article, see if the town will vote for available funds for sum of money for work on town roads, subject to conditions detailed by Chapter 30. Blah, 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 blah. Work to conform to the requirements of the Massachusetts Department of Transportation Highway Division. This gets us our Chapter 90.
Correct.
Easy breezy. I move that FinCom recommend favorable action town meeting on the article for road work, Chapter 90 funding.
Second the motion?
Thank you, Carrie. Any questions, comments?
Nope.
Hearing none, we'll move to a vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Which brings us to Article 8. Transfer of water operating budget to capital reserve fund, $35,000 from the FY20 operating fund into the capital reserve account. This is perfunctory as well. We do this every year.
Yeah, this is part of the debt that had dropped off the books, and they decided to keep that same amount of funds starting to build up again.
Yep. Okay, I move that FinCom recommend favorable action to town meeting for the article to transfer from water operating budget to water capital reserve fund.
Second?
Thanks, Gary. Questions, comments? No? All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Article 9, I move the FinCom recommend favorable action town meeting for the article to transfer from Water Department undesignated fund balance surplus to FY19, should be FY20? Or
No, it should be FY19. It's,
Oh, the operating expense.
yeah, it's
That's
the
right.
expense that they do for the new developments that gets reimbursed, but we just have to be able to put that money over.
Thank you, shouldn't have questioned it. The motion continues for article to transfer from Water Department undesignated fund balance surplus to FY19 Water Department operating expense.
Second?
Just as a point of order, because it's a current year, you need a 4/5 majority on this.
4/5, great. I don't know that we're gonna get that.
I'm holding out.
This is-
Oh, who's holding
There's
out?
gonna be a lot of talk on this one. Is there any talk on this one? If not, then we'll move to vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Just squeaked by. A few more to go. Veterans Property Tax Work-Off Program. Okay, so this is for program adopted under Article 17 of the 2016. So this was town meeting 2 years ago, right?
Mhm.
Increasing the abatement amount to $1,500, okay, for eligible veterans. So I move that FinCom recommend favorable action to town meeting for the article to amend the Veterans Property Tax Work-Off Program.
Second?
Thanks, Gary. Any questions or discussion? No? If not, we'll move to the vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Bylaw amendment is the 11th, Article 11, at least for now, for the Iron Rail Rental Revolving Fund, to see if the town will vote to amend Chapter 28, Section 2 of the general bylaws to increase fiscal spending limit, Iron Rail Rental Revolving Fund to $30,000. It was $25,000?
25,000.
In previous years? Okay. That's great. They're doing great work and bringing in good revenue, and putting some of that to work. So I move that FinCom recommend favorable action to town meeting for the article related to the bylaw amendment for the Iron Rail Rental Revolving Fund. Thanks, Mike. Questions? Discussion? Nope. Okay. Move to vote then. All in favor? Thank you. Patty, do you want to give us the high level on CPA appropriations?
Sure.
Good. Thank you.
And you can jump in anytime, okay, if you have,
Whatever you would like me to do.
Okay, so basically, the way the CPA is broken up, it's in, I believe, 8 different pieces. The first 2 are pretty much just housekeeping items. The first, you see the number 1 down there for, under the CPA appropriations, basically, the reimbursement we got from the state this year was bigger than we had anticipated by $21,800, and because 10% has to go into each, am I saying that right or wrong?
Well, so, can I clarify our?
Go ahead.
No, I'm sorry. No, so our surplus was actually, oh, the mic, yeah. Okay. So, I'm sorry, so our surplus was actually we got $75,000 more from the state than we thought we were going to because of the budget surplus being allocated to the CPA revenue. So we have to correct our FY19 10% appropriations under the CPA statute so that we can spend that money that we received, which is very exciting. I mean, how often do you get an extra $75,000 from the state?
What was the match rate?
The match rate was 41% approximately. We had forecasted for, I think, 22%.
And was that an increase from the prior year, or?
That was an increase for the first time in a good while.
Yeah.
I think that's something to keep in mind for this year. When Patty and I had discussed forecasting for FY20, that was a budget surplus, and it happened that the budget surplus was driven towards CPA when it was spent. That's not a guarantee. It's not a legislative solution to the match going down year over year, but really good for us this year as a 3% community because 1% and 2% communities get a lower state match. We get a higher state match as a 3% community. So that worked well for us this year.
When was it dollar for dollar?
2005 is when we adopted. I think it started dropping
the most
off.
Recent year that it was.
Yeah, I think it was the early 2010s that it started dropping off, and then still 70s and 80s, but now obviously more in the 30s and 40s.
Yep. That's good.
Thank you.
It's good to back up. Thanks, Jackie. Thanks, Patty.
So do we have to vote the whole article as itself, or do we vote each different?
Can you explain a procedural item? I think I forgot. I thought the CPA had, I'll use the word and I'll be wrong, but different articles that you voted on. In this case, it looks like it's all lumped together. So are you voting for the entity in itself, or at town meeting we'll actually vote for the sub-portions of them? Does that make any sense?
It looks like it's 2 votes.
I just can't remember.
Well, after there's several votes, there's about 8.
Yeah.
votes
I
that come
thought
through.
last
So-
year
The first couple are the allocation of it, and the ones after that are the different projects that have been recommended by the CPC.
Yeah, but they're all in the one article. So I thought last year, and I could be wrong, I can't remember.
I think there are other articles, right?
Different articles.
So typically there's always one article, but it's broken down into 1A, 1B, 1C, 2A, 2B, 2C, 3A subs. So I was working with town council this year on the CPA article, given some of the later legal contingencies that are occurring. And we're looking for a way to make it more readable to residents, because if you recall, it is very cumbersome to get through the 1A, 1B, 1C, and it can be confusing if the order changes or something happens. So this puts the correction of the FY19 as Section 1 and puts the annual transfers for FY20 as Section 2, and then every individual grant is a separate number rather than having 1A, 1B, 1C, 2A, 2B, 2C. We just have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8.
But do you vote for?
Each individually.
Will vote for each individual
Correct.
versus the article?
Because
Okay, all right.
they're each individual projects or then the transfer. But it's less votes than usual, actually.
So those are the 3 pages that follow, right, for a vote for each one?
And if you'll look in the warrant from prior years, Mike, the way it's broken out, it's confusing to communicate, whereas now there'll just be 8 sections instead of doing the 1A and the Bs. I think we were working on trying to make it a little bit clearer for people who aren't looking at it in advance.
Okay.
So it is different, though, in terms of how we formatted it for years, so that was a good catch.
Thank you, man.
Cool.
Thank you.
Good stuff.
Yeah, that was great.
David, did you have?
That was my
something too?
exact same question.
Really?
Yeah.
Great minds.
She is.
Yeah, I was talking about theirs.
Yeah.
All right. Okay then, I move that FinCom recommend favorable action town meeting on the article for CPA appropriations.
Section 1.
Section 1.
Yeah, okay.
Oh, thank you.
Second.
Yeah, hence all the yellow that you put there, right,
Yeah.
Patty? Okay,
Yep.
section 1.
Second.
Thanks, Mike.
Yes, sir.
All right, so,
It's just says
how much discussion are we gonna have on each of these? I mean, these are pretty big, but, I mean, they're gonna go before the town as well. What's that?
Selectmen talked all night.
Yeah, I know,
And
I know.
SCBC talked twice.
it's just
Right.
allocating the money to different areas, that's all.
Sorry?
Order your pizza now.
Right.
To answer your question, how much debate, it's really financial transactions, right? It's not approval or disapproval of some of the settlements that are in here
Right, for
some of these articles.
section 1.
And 2, and if I look at 4, some of these are just,
Do you want me to go through them really
That's-
quickly? Would that help to?
I'm
Maybe,
saying,
yes.
yes, if, I think also not to order pizza either, not that it's just, we
course.
go through 1, explain it,
Yeah.
vote on it, go 2, explain
Agreed,
it.
agreed, that makes sense.
Is it okay?
Did the board, select board didn't vote on these?
The select board spent a lot of time, especially when we hit to number 3.
Right.
Doing fixing a lot of the verbiage of it, but they
I
have not.
think they voted on one. It
They
says
voted
3-0.
on, yeah, they voted on the first one, because that's just.
That
the-
I
the
could see
functionality,
us
yeah.
doing as well,
Yeah.
but some of these others are kind of mired in,
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
you
the-
could certainly,
And what does red mean on recommendation of the
they
board of
had,
select-
they did not vote to put it on the warrant last night, just because they just didn't get around to it.
is that number 4 or number 3?
That was number 3.
Yep, the red.
That generated a lot of discussion, number 3. There was a lot of.
Isn't number 3 the
That's Arborwood.
That's-
Arbor Light?
Yeah, that's Harbor Light.
So it won't be on the warrant?
No,
It will
they
be.
hadn't made a decision on it yet.
Oh, they haven't?
Yeah.
So then we shouldn't be recommending
No.
action, right? I'm sorry.
You should.
You should.
You should. I wanted you to go first
Yeah,
for
someone's
all of these
deferring.
recommendations.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
They really wanted to
You
hear
can
from
take
you.
the blame.
Yeah, I think they're in,
To be
yeah.
fair, the CPC had to go first on all these CPC related ones.
Well,
so
that's
you're
their
not
job.
first.
Okay, let's get started.
That was a joke.
So the motion on the table then is just to the first section to
Right.
approve that.
Right.
That's transferring the 20,
And that's just
2.
for 19.
That's just
Yeah,
for
yeah.
19, that's a housekeeping item.
Right.
I don't have any more questions on that.
No, nor do I. If no others, we'll go to vote then. All in favor?
Aye.
That one is unanimous.
Okay, section 2 is basically taking the 398,300 that we are projecting for this year and putting the 10% in each pro policy area, the $7,500 in administrative, and the balance going into the budgetary reserves.
Oh, I gotta wait till a motion.
Sorry, Mike.
Okay.
So I move that FinCom recommend favorable action to town meeting on CPA appropriations, section 2.
Okay.
Thanks, Mike. All right, Gib, please.
Administrative, you have a description?
The administrative cost, my understanding is there's, a portion of it is for Jackie's, efforts and the, minute taker, Catherine.
But you didn't get paid last, sorry. You didn't get paid last
It
year?
just gets split up.
It's not 19.
Yeah,
Yeah.
That gets turned back.
and some of it goes to we are part of a
It's as
community
needed.
preservation coalition, so we have our dues, public
right.
hearing notices.
Is that new?
No,
It just was buried before?
I think it just looks different, but I will say it's been
Right.
7,500 for several years, and usually 2,000 to 3,000 gets returned back to the CPA general fund at the close of the fiscal year. So we've just never reduced it. It's been consistent. I think for at least the last 4 fiscal years, it's been at 7,500 since CPA started having a minutes staff and administrative assistants.
So then that follows, then it's the same logic for the budgetary reserve then?
Correct.
Okay.
I was gonna ask about the budgetary reserves. That's a reserve for the CPA. They have their own separate account.
It's basically, if I understand it correctly, it's basically any of the CPA money that's not specifically earmarked for 3 of the policies. So it's kind of, I guess.
Flexible.
For lack of a better term, up for grabs for any type of project, whereas the policy programs, they would have to be done for those policies.
That can stay in a reserve account and move forward to the next year as well.
Correct. Correct.
It's like it becomes the free cash
Right.
of CPC.
Yeah.
And how does that get managed?
The committee manages it.
Sorry?
The committee manages it. Correct. I mean, as far as like invested? I
No,
mean,
just overseen. Is it part of, is it overseen
Community
by?
Preservation Committee.
The Community Preservation Committee with the assistance of myself.
And, I'm sorry, do you have any more questions? Okay. So these are the amounts, going in, but it says vote to transfer from the Community Preservation Fund. So is that close to zeroing it out? How much is
Would
in
you
the
like me
fund?
to-
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry. We'll get you there. It's just the first one around. So
This is all clear where it's gonna go to. I'm just wondering
Yes.
what we're talking about that's in the fund.
So the way that we handle the CPA fund is that we have annual money coming into CPA from the local surcharge and from the state match. So those are the 2 funding sources of CPA. And at town meeting time, those monies are CPA, and this article puts them into certain sub-accounts within CPA.
Largely zeroing it out.
No, this is the revenue side of CPA, of where we're putting the revenues when they're coming in.
Right.
So like,
Different
So there's no
buckets.
revenues, those sit
To-
around in a different account somewhere.
there are CPA accounts that reflect these titles that do have, some have funds in them, some don't. So this is, for example, in Article 1, when you guys go over Article 1 as a committee, Patty and Peter do the revenue forecasting as part of Article 1 and make assumptions on those revenue accounts so that they can build the expense side of Article 1. So this is CPA's revenue side of Article 1, but under the CPA statute, so the verbiage is a little bit different.
And what's the 10% of estimated annual revenue?
That's the 10% of estimated annual revenue is under the CPA statute. 10% of annual revenue has to go or be spent towards each policy area that CPA
Oh, right.
covers.
Yep.
So we can legally meet that statute, and it makes it a fair shot for the 3 different policy areas to get funding for projects.
And that's section 2.
That's
That's the
section
section
2.
It's
Section two,
basically
yep,
dispersing the funds that we expect to receive via the tax bills and the state match.
Yep.
That's it.
So theoretically then, I mean, we could, well, this is a question, not a statement. Theoretically, we could take that 270,000 budgetary reserves and choose to spend it on other community projects.
You
The commu-
could not,
You couldn't,
but the Community Preservation Committee could
Well,
recommend.
When I say you, I
Oh,
mean
yeah.
the
Yeah.
generic,
The generic.
Sure, yeah.
Not the
worldly
all-powerful FinCom Padres.
But on Jim's point, this puts it in the 3 buckets for the CPC's purposes,
Statute, yep.
statute, but doesn't speak to how it'll get spent.
Correct, that's
Section,
articles, that's sections 3 through 8 is expenditures.
Right.
This is
right.
the revenue allocation of,
Which is formulaic.
this is somewhat formulaic, yes. We could do it differently, this is traditionally how we've done it.
Right.
And it is something that the CPC does make a voted recommendation on for town meeting. Because if we were to, for example, on the floor of town meeting, if this section 2 were to be amended, we would have to identify on the floor in sections 3 through 8, we would have to change where the funds are coming from appropriately, because there's 2 is an assumption that has to be made by the CPC to be able to make decisions about 3 through 8, the same way that when Patty and Peter make assumptions about revenues in Article 1, so that the FinCom and Selectmen can make decisions about the expenditure side.
Yes.
Does that comparison help, I think, in the revenue versus the expense piece?
Yep.
Okay,
Yeah.
Helps me.
you good?
Yeah, good enough.
Okay, yeah, you looked like you had another question, so.
Don't go too far.
I'll go read the CPA tonight,
It's a really fun statute, let me tell you.
Sure.
after I watched last night's select board meeting.
I'm sure that clarified.
And so one more question, is 271,000 what remains after
Yes.
these transfers?
Yep.
Thank you. Sorry if that point was already made clear. I have no further questions on this particular section of the article. But if others do, please chime in.
Nope.
Okay, then we can move to a vote, unless, you good? Okay, all right. The motion again is to provide favorable action, to recommend favorable action to town meeting on the CPA appropriations, Article, Section 2. All in favor?
Right.
Now we talk about the expenditures, right, in Section 3. Okay, in particular, this is the Harbor Light project.
Yep.
Okay.
So basically what this will do is it tells you how much they're looking for and where all that money's gonna come from the different buckets
Right.
of the CPA.
So what are the implications of, we're providing recommendation to town, so this goes before the residents at town meeting, and they need to vote to approve this particular project as this section, right?
Correct.
Funding of it, using monies from each of these, right? From each of these
Correct.
categories. And Affordable Housing Trust is part of this as well? Or that's separate?
That's
This is the
separate. This
CPA
is the
monies only.
CPA community
Yep.
housing.
Right.
Is this allowing us to have first right of refusal? Or is the money going to pay to Harbor Light to go build?
So, are you referring to the fact that the property in question is in chapter?
No,
Okay,
I'm talking about the money.
so, say it one more.
So you're giving 750K to someone to do something.
As a grant, correct.
So we're paying Harbor Light to go, we're gonna pay for them to go build a building.
To create affordable housing, correct.
Right, right. We're giving them money to buy it, or if this were to go through, we'd be handing over money so that they could
And they in turn,
have a
sell the
building.
units or charge.
These will be rental units.
Right,
These
still
will be
for a
rental.
profit entity though.
Nonprofit.
My
Nonprofit?
understanding is that the town, this 750 adds to another number greater of 1.5.
Yeah, I think it's 650 from the housing trust, or?
Well,
it-
there's not been a request made to the trust
Okay,
yet,
I'm sorry.
but there will be, potentially, we've heard there could be an ask from a different entity of the town, the Affordable Housing Trust, for a total amount, but we haven't had that request
But
made.
no, I guess where I was going with the
Sure.
750 is Harbor Light needs this money to leverage the funding of this total project.
Correct.
Yeah, that's what
That's what they say.
3.5.
It's what they've made in their application.
Started out asking for $1 million, right?
No, the CPA application was always at 750,000.
Where did at least $1 million from the town commitment
That
come from?
came from the binding term sheet that was made public by Harbor Light by including it in their CPA application.
So Harbor Light's document stated they wanted to see at least $1 million
The-
commitment from the town?
Binding term sheet between the plaintiff
Oh,
and the
the-
defendant on the litigation.
Okay,
That was a contingency of that binding term sheet between the plaintiff and the defendant in the
so
litigation.
why is it, so which one stands, the million or what Harbor Light? Why would it say $1 million
So-
if Harbor Light was only
So
asking for
that's
750?
the binding term sheet in that two parties are in litigation and went into mediation and they're trying to come to an agreement, and that's a condition that they settled upon. The town, while named in the litigation, was not a part of the mediation. And this is something that Peter Lombardi covered a lot better than I could in the CPA meeting on February 13th. He did a really good summary of this whole process. But what has occurred is that contingency has triggered an application by Harbor Light Community Partners to the CPA for $750,000.
They reopened the window temporarily, right?
Correct, and the reopening included this application, and the community house application was allowed to enter. They had not turned in.
Which is the next section, is that right?
Yeah, I think it's maybe a
Jump
couple
ahead,
away.
there's one of them, okay.
But so at this time, Harbor Light has made application to only the CPA for $750,000. It was recommended by the CPA at that amount. They did kick back and forth, higher, lower, much discussion on this. But the CPA did settle on recommending the $750,000 as requested with some contingencies. And in your packet tonight are some additional contingencies the Board of Selectmen are considering.
Let me ask a different question, if I may. So, we pay Harbor Light, the town pays Harbor Light to go build the units. Harbor Light charges a fee for the residents to use. And you said it was a nonprofit. Do we still, they still pay taxes on that property?
Most likely not,
When you
as a
said it,
nonprofit. I
You
will
just
say,
said most likely, or you're not sure?
I say most likely not, because it's secondhand information from me. It was discussed at the Selectmen's meeting last night in regards to the fact that it is a nonprofit organization. They have some,
Careful. So I'm part of a nonprofit.
yep,
I pay taxes. So there's some portion of what I have in my nonprofit is subject to tax.
Yeah,
So I'm
different
just trying to-
definitions of nonprofit, right?
Right,
Yeah,
so
and-
I'm
and
just
I
trying to
think
get an
in
understanding.
in this circumstance, what I have from hand information from last night and from the pro forma in their CPA application is that they're anticipating paying some of that property tax burden for, I think, 5 years. But as the type of nonprofit that they are, we may not be able to expect that property tax burden
So we'll get.
being paid
we-
forever.
We won't get any revenue. There's no revenue coming from this.
Not at this time that I can say.
The valuation was really low, so the
Yeah, we got
assessor,
revised valuation.
the assessor originally said it was gonna be
Like
pretty
80, 90
meaningful.
grand,
Yeah,
yeah.
per unit
Yeah.
or something like that, and it was,
We had that discussion.
10x what it was, came back at it at $1 million
25
valuation all in
I
or
turned
something
to
like
Peter
that.
and I said, Peter, can you do a X-year projection of what the revenue would look like to recoup the $750? And he said, yeah, I was thinking the exact same thing. So I'm wondering, even though Harbor Light is a nonprofit, whether the structure and the governance of these housing units might be somehow separated out and be able to be taxable units. Should that be part of our understanding
Of a covenant.
of this $750 gift?
Yeah, and I don't think that's a question
So,
for
I'm
me.
not-
Yeah, no,
I'm
I think
not-
that's a question
I'm just
that,
posing
It's a
that.
question.
that's a question
at
to
large
be answered
as to the
at large.
process in
Yeah, of
general.
course.
Could I answer that?
No, but I think that's something where there was discussion about making it known so that if there are certain questions that the developer or, the applicant should be answering, he might be made available to answer those questions. But I think at the same time, I know Peter was working on some additional fiscal information about this project and the other affordable housing project.
But there's another part of this, that if we build these number of units, it will either reach or exceed our, what's the word?
Affordable housing.
10% affordable housing
Yeah.
stock.
Thank you.
Well, that's the sole motivation in all of this, right? It's clearly not for tax revenue. It's to prevent another, I say another unfriendly developer, because you're handing over $1 million, it's $750,000 here. I don't know how that's not unfriendly. I mean, you're paying them to buy it. I don't know. I mean, I just, from what I know about it, but you prevent another entrant to leverage, 40B to create another development, because this would put us well over that. And
Yep.
and people have different thoughts about what that means. I'm just looking at the numbers of it, and I'm trying to figure out what, is all this still in flux, or is it pretty much wrapped up? Because
So-
I have not paid attention in the last week, or probably 2 weeks, to this particular matter as much as I should have, whereas I had seen the meetings when the Harbor Light gentleman
I
presented
think
here. and-
Catherine wants to speak
Sure.
to it. Do you want this, though?
Just came from an Affordable Housing Trust meeting, so.
Oh, then you're in a good position too.
I was returning the recorder, but since I'm here, and since there seem to be a lot of questions about that, let me just speak to what I know of the process relative to the settlement. So we know there was litigation. This project was appealed in 2014, and by a group of petitioners, and that it has been in litigation since then. And I will forget the dates, but somewhat recently, representatives from both sides sat in a binding mediation and came up with an outline of concessions that they could agree to.
in an outline form, and that is what everybody's talking about and what's in the CPC application, and it's called the binding terms. That is a legal document. However, as it's been explained to us, it is an outline of what each side would be willing to compromise. The next step of that process is for the lawyers on each side to draft an implementation document, which is actually called the settlement agreement. So one side will draft it, the other side, to go back and forth. There'll be some kind of a negotiation, and the result of that will be a formal settlement document. That's the one we're waiting for, because that's the one that will specifically say how some of these things that are just kind of thrown out there will be implemented. And until they have that, the town has no part in that. Until that exists, the town, there is still open litigation on some other points. And when that exists, together with the town, we can actually move towards dismissing the rest of the case and perhaps remanding it back to the project back to the ZBA. So that's the kind of a long way of saying that it's a process, and we won't know the outcome of that process, at least the settlement agreement, until the parties settle.
So is this a placeholder, Catherine, or in argument's sake you settled tomorrow? So now this is a placeholder to move forward versus you'd have to wait?
I think that's why, if you look at that CPC, what you have in front of you, again, I'm looking at Patty's and it's in blue. It's been amended, I think, based on our meeting last night. There are 8, I think, contingencies. Very unusual to see really anything that we have to vote on in town meeting that is contingent upon a whole lot of other things happening. I hope, for everyone's sake, that a few of those contingencies go away by the town meeting occurs, because it just creates a lot of questions. But those contingencies are in there to protect the town from either committing and having someone tying up funds that can't be used for anything else, that the CPC can't be used for anything else, as well as to protect the town from exposure, if you want to call it that, for those units not counting on our SHI. It's a whole complicated formula. So there are a lot of contingencies on that particular one. And that's all. I won't take more of your time, except, and I'm sorry, I kind of dropped in the middle. I assume that you know or will know that the selectmen have not yet put that on the warrant.
Right.
So, and
No, I don't think I knew that. I knew you had, oh yeah, no, you did point that out. Yeah,
right,
yeah,
so,
sorry.
that
was the next
I guess it's
article in red. Yeah,
in a
next.
way, it's a policy decision for you to decide whether you want to take a position. I know Jackie behind me, I'm not even going to look, because she's really anxious to get everything. Well,
We have a Zoom in.
well, because we had, it would be very nice to have positions on everything that could be printed in the warrant book, because that's the most transparent way of doing that. But since we had some legal issues that we needed to resolve before we were even willing to put this on the warrant, we did not put it on the warrant. So if you were to vote to take some kind of action,
Contingent on it being on the warrant.
contingent on it being on the warrant and it not changing,
Or no.
because we don't know yet, we haven't decided.
It's the same, I would say too, it's the same way, we did discuss earlier tonight having a TBD in place of a printed recommendation.
Right.
That's an option. At the same time.
You mean a
for example-
deferral until town meeting?
Yes.
Correct, and that could just be in there.
Right.
It's at the FinCom's.
Right.
But so your recommendation would be contingent on the selectmen putting it on the warrant.
Yeah.
And
If you wanted
that's
to
true.
make
To
such a,
some,
if
with-
you wanted
to
to
some
make such a
wording.
recommendation.
Or you could say, you'll give them an opinion at town meeting, hoping that there'll be more information.
Are any of the conditions that are on here expected to be met by, like the settlement? Is there any sense that may be here by April?
No idea. not under our control.
If we don't vote, if it doesn't go on the warrant this year and there's no vote by the community, does it just move forward to next year? Does it move it down, just move it down the road another year?
I think it, well,
Or does it go away? I mean,
Special town meeting?
I don't, so if an application is not voted on,
I don't know that it's, I will say that from my understanding, there's never been a circumstance where a CPC recommendation has not been put on the warrant by, like, and the overview of that lesson last night is on the selectmen's meeting to watch, of the fact that it's the selectmen's warrant, they have unfettered access, it is only their warrant.
right,
But from my understanding, that provision of the selectmen not adding a CPC recommendation to a warrant has never been utilized by a community that has CPC. So
Right.
I don't have a good answer for you right now, but I would have an answer soon, but I don't have an answer right now.
and we have another meeting. We have not put it on the warrant. We have not voted to not ever put it on the
All right,
warrant.
what's your deadline for doing so?
Next week?
Right.
So, we did close the warrant because we needed to do that. We can open the warrant again and we will probably have to open it again to address this particular issue. Last I heard, we're potentially meeting on Monday and Tuesday of next week so that we can get these.
And does CPC have opinions about these additional conditions that the BOS added?
So,
Or has it been too soon because they were just added since yesterday?
yeah, so I will say, let me clarify that conditions 1 through 4 in your packets were recommendations of the CPC. And I will say that the final condition, it's now 9, was also a condition of the CPC's original motion. So those 5, 1 through 4 and 9 in your packets were recommended by the CPC along with the funding. And I will say that the original text of this motion was recommended by the CPC. So the only pieces that have been added by the Board of Selectmen are 6, 7, and 8. And it was discussed last night, and I believe
5?
sorry, yes, 5, 6, 7, and 8. Thank you, Carrie. So those were added by the selectmen last night, and I know that they're going to be communicated with the CPC at large. I know they've already been sent to the chair of the CPC. We're trying to stay in touch, but the CPC has had their process and made their recommendation. So I don't, and it's at the point where the selectmen are making additional contingencies to go to town meeting, and as is their right to do, as the group in charge of the warrant, and working with town council more closely than anyone else.
So, can I ask a couple of quick questions? So how much is, of the $750,000, the source of that, how much is in those coffers? How much will be left after, this would exhaust?
Sure, so
Right,
the simple answer is that if all projects that are before town meeting
right,
are fully funded, there would be approximately $50,000 in the CPA fund balance, approximately $50,000 in the budgetary reserve, and approximately $677,000 in the open space fund. And there would be a 0 balance in community housing and a 0 balance in historic preservation. That's if all of the projects 3 through 8.
what do they total?
They total approximately 1.4 million.
Okay. It's
Jackie,
about half to the.
a generic question, kind of along those lines. What is the total revenue developed from the community on our tax? What do we generate annually?
So for fiscal 2020, it's in the $400,000 range. And that's derived from the 3% surcharge. I will say that the first $100,000 of your assessment is an exemption that we have on CPA, and we also have exemptions for veterans and seniors, and basically anyone that's eligible for the traditional exemptions is also eligible to take the CPA exemption. So we also factor in that, and I would say, I think last year we had about $8,000 in CPA exemptions.
So this is an extraordinary year. This would be an extraordinary
I would
expenditures.
this would be extraordinary for a lot of reasons. It's the
Lots
first
of
time.
reasons in terms of the total amount that we generate each year in terms of community revenues.
It is an extraordinary year in the expenditures. It's an extraordinary year in that we've never gotten the affordable housing pool has only ever made grants in regards to transfers to the Affordable Housing Trust. This will be the first two, if so voted by town meeting, community housing projects, with the exception of when Harbor Light Community Partners came to the CPA the first time, but that project obviously went into litigation and was never realized. So these are the first community housing projects, so that is an extraordinary thing as well. But it would be it would be a very big year for CPC. It would be extraordinary. It would change the fund balance scope dramatically.
But the reasoning, and this is more of a question, not a statement, is that the reasoning being why it's okay for them to be low, because we've satisfied a lot of the requirements, so there might not be another need for that kind of affordable housing, right?
So that's a policy opinion. I can't answer that.
Okay.
That's a policy opinion for the CPC, for the selectmen, for the voters.
Okay.
You know, the CPC was created for these types of projects to have a municipal funding source and a state match, and how the community wants to spend those dollars in those policy areas is a value statement, is a policy statement. So unfortunately, I don't want to answer that question because it's not my value statement to make.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's fraught with like policy, right, opinions,
Okay.
or at the very least opinions, if not policy, matters. But, I mean, it strikes me that this is exhausting. There's a request to have the FinCom vote to provide favorable or not action, and yet, I mean, this is the town budget, right? So we had all the department heads.
Yeah, of course.
Right, here's what we want to spend our money on and why, and then justification. And then you get to this, and it's, I mean, sure, we tune in where we can,
Yeah.
but to appreciate all of the intricacies and technical nuances of all of this, like from watching the BOS meetings, yeah, sure, I have a sense for, I know that the document that talks about bringing it down a level and the fans got to go over here and the trees go here. I get all that stuff.
Sure.
It's interesting reading, but to keep up with it has not been something that
It's been a
we've done
very
with the
dense
help of
year.
CPA
Yeah.
or CPC to understand this is a huge ask, and to, you know, I don't feel like I'm in a position to have a good enough understanding of whether or not this is the right move financially. Yes, policy matters aside, I understand the motivation. It could very well be a great project. Harbor Light could be the perfect company for the job at the right place at the right time, and it represents a culmination of 2 years of litigation, the headaches and the hard
Yeah.
work that go along with it. Or it could be not a good move financially for the town, and to come to a recommendation for the town, I don't feel like I'm in a position to tonight. So my suggestion is that we defer until either town meeting or at a later time, once this is definitely on the warrant or not, and we can get up to speed,
And I think,
because this is huge.
Alex, to that end, what we can do is provide you with Catherine's CPC minutes on this subject, because there was a lot of discussion and debate by the CPC, and it ended up being an 8-1 vote. So I think if it would be helpful to you, knowing that you want to defer on your recommendation, what I can do is provide you with the application materials, if you think that would be helpful, and provide you with the minutes from the CPC discussions as a summary, rather than there were two rather lengthy meetings. Do you think that would be helpful to your
Yes.
time?
Doesn't it is it odd, the process, though, that it hasn't involved, I mean, I know these are largely policy matters because it is going to go before the town, so the Board of Selectmen would be the ones at the table with CPC and, of course, involved in any litigation directly. But as it relates to the culmination of our recommendation, one way or another, without our direct involvement, save for, you know, joining in these meetings, which frankly isn't our charge to be a part of those every single, you know.
Yeah, I guess following up on that,
Yeah.
would it be worth, on a going forward basis, for us to get the way we do with the town budget and to get briefings, is to be involved in briefings with big ticket items like this, or something substantive in the future?
Kind of what I was thinking.
Well,
Not that it's a department head that's asking for this money. It's very different the way it's allocated in these categories, I get it.
But we are voting, and it does have a significant impact either way on the community and on the town. And so I agree that having more information is better. and perhaps I should have more information before I'm sitting here. But I just think, having something like this on our radar screen sooner would be helpful, although I know it's still a lot pending. So I guess I would, for FY21, is maybe sooner rather than later in the process, have a sense of what some of these bigger ticket items are that are going to be articles on the warrant.
And can I speak to that briefly? Is that I will say this is an extraordinary year, but I think we can do a better job in future. The CPC has their process dictated by the CPA statute, it's Mass General Law. From my recollection of the statute, not that I read it today, but there's really no legal weigh-in process for a local finance and advisory committee, but I think in a collaborative sense, there's a lot of time and opportunity to communicate with the FinCom earlier about these, and I think so. It is an extraordinary year in that there are so many big ticket items, and this big ticket item in particular. So I think that's something that we can work on, is what kind of update, whether it's a quick memo or something, or the presentation by someone from the CPC. I'm not sure what that looks like. I think that is a thing that we can do early on in the process next year. Absolutely.
I wouldn't rule that out even for something along the lines for this year potentially too. Just that is a discussion with somebody. I mean, I'm just going to ask: does anyone feel in a position where they feel compelled to vote on this, or feel like they're wish to do so?
One more question.
Of course.
Or a question or statement. So, just so I'm clear, just personally, this let's say we voted the 750. This does not impact our surcharge. That's a question. Our surcharge stays the same.
No, the surcharge stays the same.
Stays the same. The 750, because these might be questions that community members from the floor of town meeting
absolutely.
The 750 does not impact our operating budget.
Correct.
The 750 is not, quote, an override.
Correct.
No, it's none of those things.
It's
not a budget
CPA,
appropriation.
It's not a budgetary.
It is a separate appropriation from a separate pool of money.
From the state and from our surcharge CPA Act.
Correct. As it does not mix.
So for me, and now for me the question would be, okay, so if all that is the case, what are the advantages to such a development, that we were talking about? What are the disadvantages, if any? And getting back to the last, I mentioned to Peter the other night, hey, can we do a 5-year or 10-year projection of what revenue exists? I would really like to clarify through this the status of, even though Harbor Light's in 501c3, the status of this actually project, because I would love to be able to say, this is great. It meets subsidized housing. That's a huge need in the Commonwealth of Mass. It meets our 40B requirements. It's an ethical issue for a lot of folks to stay in the community, but can we get some revenue out of it? Is that a possibility? So those are my general concerns. But I think this issue of where does it fit in the whole scheme of community budgeting should be.
With a fiscal lens, how do we consider it? Separating out all those other kind of political or personal preference matters.
Or overrides or tax base, et cetera.
Exactly. Is this the right? So all of those things you said are true. It's not going to impact the tax rate. It's not an override.
I think it's an important thing to just state.
And yet they are the taxpayer dollars. And if we're saying yes or no,
taxpayer dollars, but it doesn't change. We're paying it now. And the other, I guess the other consideration would be in 21, it doesn't negate us doing projects that we want to do for the community. We're still going to be developing $400,000 of revenue that will go into next year's pot, if you will.
Correct. The only time that that revenue would not be coming in annually is after a vote of town meeting and a ballot question to either reduce the surcharge or to remove CPC, which I think is a separate policy conversation from this piece.
Okay, thank you.
So we talked about, getting up to speed and getting things on our radar screen for FY21, but for FY20, you had mentioned, that seems like it's a little up in the air, whether we meet with someone, or you'd mentioned meeting minutes and application, and however we get the information. I'm also curious to get CPC, I'm happy to watch a meeting or something, opinion on these additional conditions that were added yesterday.
And I think the challenge that we are facing right now, I think, number one, happy to work with this board to get you the information you'd like, whether it's by written or verbal communication, and coordinate that piece so that you feel you have time to make a decision before making an action, a recommendation on town meeting floor. So that's a conversation of what methodology for that communication you want for the next couple of weeks, given all the other things going on. And I think part two, just made me lose my train of thought. So I think that was part one. Yeah, I think so. I think it's finding those two areas, finding the areas of which how you want to be communicated about this, and figuring out a good way to do that for next year. And I think, the second piece I was getting feedback from the CPC, and I honestly, these were late breaking changes last night, probably 10 o'clock. So I will say that, so I think we're working really hard to meet the legal deadline for the warrant piece. And when I say we, I use the royal we of that the Board of Selectmen are doing that, and I'm just working to make sure it goes to the printer on time. I think that's something, again, TBD of like what that communication looks like. And I think that's something that Peter is managing as, the executor of the Board of Selectmen's discretion and decisions. So I think that's TBD. Unfortunately.
It's sort of, we need influencers here. I'd be surprised if somebody, because I know, I can totally appreciate, having watched some of those meetings, how much incredible work, time, effort, money has been spent with lots of different parties. And there's an effort here at the 11th hour to really get this thing done after years of being tied up. And deadlines have come, open the application, close it, and there's different ways of approaching that stuff. But if I put myself on that side, to not have had any, direct interaction with FinCom, to then expect that, they got to be up 100% on all this matter, with a clear view and in a good position to state, as is their charge, whether or not it's appropriate for the town to say yes or no to the allocation of these tax dollars. I don't know what I don't know, and so I'm not in a good position to make that claim on behalf of the residents.
And I think, Alex, that really speaks to the fact that we haven't had projects of this scale come up very often. And I think for us, with CPC, we're always learning. We just started really in the last few fiscal years doing, you'll notice there's language for a grant agreement with the Board of Selectmen in all of these motions. So I think CPC has only been around since 2005. We've had it since we voted in 2005. We've started raising funds and doing projects in 2007. So I think for us, this is a big year for CPC, and it's an extraordinary year, to use Jim's word earlier. So I think whatever I can do, not to push you in any policy direction, that's not why I'm here. I'm just here to provide information. So however you would like that information provided in the next couple of weeks, I would be happy to do so. And if that includes having a representative from the CPA here, providing documents from the application process, however you as a board would like that information, I'd be happy to provide it to help you feel like you have enough information.
Why don't we collectively work with Patty and you to try and figure out the next plan to get us to that next step where we're in a good position to make the right call? Because I don't think, speaking personally, I don't feel compelled one way or another. One or two quick questions. One, did we get the private valuation back that we had the RFT for?
We have not gotten that back as of last evening. That's what Peter noted last night. Secondhand news. I haven't heard anything today different. So we'll get. I am imagining we'll get that private appraisal soon, but.
Okay, we haven't yet anyway.
Yeah.
I think maybe that's the only question I had.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
That's my best suggestion right now. If people on the committee are okay with that.
I think deferring so we can get more up to speed is good, and I think a couple weeks is plenty of time to do that. And also, just in case there's any movement on these conditions or on the process, deferring is also worth it.
Great. Yep. So we can make the right call. Does anyone feel like amending the motion?
What's your motion, please?
I don't think we made one.
Did I not make a motion? I did?
Didn't make an original one.
Okay, then I will make a motion.
Maybe we should check with Catherine.
I think you're right. I think I did.
He didn't make a motion.
So
We walked right into it.
I move that the FinCom defer recommendation of favorable action to town meeting on the CPA appropriations article section 3. Thank you.
Second.
Thanks, Mike. questions? Good for now? Okay. Go to vote then, all in favor?
Aye.
Thank you, sorry about that. Well, no one's voted on it yet, right? I mean, we're just the first to not vote.
Only CPC has made a recommendation on this, 'cause
Right.
they had to.
Right. And we will, when the time comes, we'll have more better questions and thoughts from a financial standpoint. Which brings us to 4.
It's procedural.
Yep, this is the bond.
Oh, got it.
This is the town hall bond.
Got it, thank you, okay. I move that the FinCom provide favorable action to town meeting for Article CPA appropriations, Section 4.
A second.
Thanks, David. This is to move money from Community Preservation Fund, Historic Resources Reserve, to budgetary reserves, yeah. Okay. For Town Hall. Any questions?
No.
Discussion, no? Then we'll move to a vote, all in favor? Thank you. Okay, next up, Habitat Project. Right? Habitat for Humanity, okay. Someone give us a quick primer on it? Either Patty or Jackie, if you don't mind.
So this was an application made to the CPC by Habitat for Humanity for $60,000. $60,000 was requested by the applicant and recommended by the CPC. It would be for 2 affordable housing units on Hull Street, at 40 Hull Street, 1 2-bedroom, 1 3-bedroom unit. This project has received its comprehensive permit from the Zoning Board of Appeals. I believe it's already in the appeal process where it's filed with the clerk, and if someone were to take an appeal, that's the timeline that we're in right now. Full disclosure, this project did receive funding for acquisition from the Affordable Housing Trust, but that is a separate entity, and that was recommended by the Affordable Housing Trust and then by a vote of the Board of Selectmen. So this would be a separate grant application by a separate funding source for this project. And this was also recommended by the CPC at a vote of 5 to 4 off the top of my head. Yes, 5 to 4.
That was, just to clarify, that was one of my questions. The CPC voted 5 to 4 or affordable housing?
The CPC voted 5 to 4 in recommendation of this,
Okay.
what's before you. The Affordable Housing Trust, I am not sure if their vote, sorry? Unanimous, and I believe the Board of Selectmen was unanimous too on that separate earlier funding request.
What was,
So-
do you know why the
Yeah.
4 votes were against?
So there was a lot of discussion, given the fiscal constraints of CPC and that there is only so much money in the pot. And so there was some discussion about funding this project from 2 different sources, but I will say that I think most of the discussion is hard for me to comment on because it's a value piece. It's how folks feel about affordable housing, the types of projects that are being submitted. What I can come to you with is that there was a 5 to 4 recommendation. With the contingencies that you have before you are as recommended by the CPC. There haven't been changes. But I will say that that's a hard discussion for me to provide feedback to you on, just because it is a value statement, and I think for me, I'm going to say the 5 to 4 and there.
I think 2 voted in the negative.
Was it 5 to 2 or
I had 2 of the members voting in the negative.
from the first meeting or the second meeting? So I'm going with the first meeting where they voted the funding rather than where they just corrected the motion language. So it was because at the first meeting with all 9 members. So I apologize. There were 2 different votes, one on the funding and then a later vote to redo.
Jackie.
I'm sorry?
No, I'm sorry. It was,
Oh, okay.
it was unanimous at the second meeting.
Yeah, and that was just approving the motion language, but at the first meeting where they discussed funding, it was 5 to 4 in terms of the funding recommendation. They had a subsequent meeting just looking at language, so that was unanimous, but
It's a competing project to the Harbor Light in some ways as far as source of funds, so could it have been that the thought was there might not be enough money for Harbor Light if this was funded as well? Or is it so much smaller that it doesn't really matter?
I think that was definitely a part of the discussion. Different people made each half of what you just said as points. And I'm not here to represent
Sure.
that.
Yeah,
but
I'm not trying to put you on the spot.
yeah, no, it's just hard. It's hard because it was a long discussion and different people have different reasons. I think even tonight, a good example of that, different people have different reasons for voting for or against their recommendation, whether it's fiscal or legal or based on the policy statement that the project makes. But they did vote to recommend it to town meeting.
Right, right.
So this reminds me a little bit of number 3, but these are more thoughts, not opinions. That's something we don't know about. It's a lot less money than number 3. The board did approve it, the CPC approved it, so I think, Mr. Chairman, I think if to me, this would be less of a TBD than number 3 because just the numbers
On the
are
basis
much
of
less.
it being a 12th of the other.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So, just reading this,
You like that, Mr. Chairman?
Yeah. It's like looking who?
Jackie is the expert on it.
You can tell
Jackie,
I'm
so
burnt when I'm not laughing.
Reading this, it looks to me the 60,000 is part of an application process that the Board of Selectmen enter into a grant agreement with the Habitat for Humanity, setting forth terms and conditions, et cetera, that the town be provided with affordable housing, da-da-da-da-da. So this grant has not been exercised yet?
No, so this motion would grant the funds and authorize the Board of Selectmen to enter into a grant agreement on the basis of the conditions in this motion.
Does Habitat for Humanity throw in X dollars in addition to our 60,000?
Habitat for Humanity has a pro forma of funding sources that for the construction piece, which this 60,000 is a part of. They are also seeking state funding as a family affordable housing project, and I believe that there'll be some fundraising or some support coming from Habitat as well. I don't have it in front of me, I apologize. And then there's also, as with any Habitat project, the volunteer hours and the homeowners' time in the project component as well.
So if I just boil this, the $60,000 then is a statement by the community, a good faith effort statement by the community that we're willing to move this forward.
I think it could be, yes.
But it doesn't, but there's the possibility that the grant may not be awarded, that they may not get the funding. What happens to our 60,000 then?
So the town meeting vote would work to appropriate the 60,000. The grant agreement would just be to settle the terms of the transfer of that 60,000 with the basis of these conditions, meaning that they get their comprehensive permit, they get their town department approvals. Those are the contingencies listed here. Some of the contingencies listed here. The grant agreement is language that's you're going to find in all of these CPA grant project articles. It's not language we've been including historically. We started including it last year and maybe the year before on 1 or 2. So that it's language from council so that the projects as submitted in an application as voted by town meeting are what the community gets as a product, so that we have some teeth in holding the applicant to the application that they've represented to the CPC.
And just one, even though the dollars are probably relatively small, is this on the tax rolls or off the tax rolls?
None of the CPA projects are on the tax rolls. They're all out of that CPA fund.
They're all nonprofit, they're not
Well,
real estate tax.
No, you pay for
Oh.
it every year.
Yeah. You pay for the
pay
CPA
10%.
monies.
You pay for it every year.
On your taxes.
No, I understand that, I'm talking about.
Do you mean the unit? Oh, yes, the units will be paying property taxes.
Yeah, okay.
That's what I was.
Oh, I apologize. I misunderstood your question. I'm so sorry.
Get 10,000 in taxes for.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, Carrie?
For the Harbor Light one.
That was for the Harbor Light one.
Right. So this one,
We'll be paying property taxes.
nonprofit.
This is a home ownership.
Yeah.
So it'll be a condo association.
Habitat, they help.
Yep.
The construction.
Yeah, home ownership versus like a rental that needs someone to own it. I will say that the Habitat will be in the condo. There'll be a third figure in the condo association. There'll be the 2 homeowners, and then Habitat stays as a part of that, just in perpetuity, and you'll notice that both this and the number 3 do have an affordable housing deed restriction on the property in perpetuity. So Habitat stays along to make sure that that's happening, but these are units that will be be assessed by the assessor.
Who's
And
responsible for the ongoing maintenance, the 2 owners?
the condominium association, which is the 2 owners and Habitat. And that's, you know, they'll have their condominium agreement as part of the comprehensive permit process and state funding processes with these affordable units. Those condominium documents get submitted at some point. I think we're a little early for those pieces of the puzzle to come together.
But there's a mechanism.
There is correct a mechanism, absolutely.
I'm ready to vote on it now.
Yeah, me too.
I am as well. The Board of Selectmen has not voted on this one as well.
It's on the warrant.
Warrant, they haven't taken.
Both voted on the warrant, but haven't taken a
Made-
position for favorable action. Are you doing them all at once, sort of?
And it was definitely getting a little late as we
Yeah.
were hitting some of these as they were hitting some of these last evening. It was getting a little late.
Yep. Yep. I'm okay with voting this one if others are as well.
Yep.
I haven't heard what you said, Sean.
I'm okay with proceeding to a vote if the rest of the committee is
I'm fine with that.
also, and if there are no further questions. We have a motion, right? It was seconded.
Mhm.
Did we have a motion?
We don't have a motion.
We don't have a motion? No.
We've been doing discussions now.
I need to number these pages because I keep losing track. Section.
Number 5.
Thank you, Carrie. So I move that FinCom recommend favorable action to town meeting for the CPA appropriations article, section 5.
Second.
Thanks, Mike.
I'm sure.
Any other questions,
Nope.
discussion?
No.
If not, then we'll move to a vote. All in favor?
Aye.
It's unanimous. Okay, that brings us to 6, which is community house
Heating system.
heating system.
Yeah, I have a question. What are the Hamilton contingency language that's referenced in the column? Is
Just-
it what's in here?
Oh,
No, it's not. I'm getting. We're working on getting that language from Hamilton, but the meat of that contingency is that construction must begin by July 1, 2020.
Or they can ask for an extension if a good faith effort has been made?
That language would be determined in the grant agreement. But I think the Wenham CPC did not vote to add that condition. The Hamilton CPC did. Hamilton CPC is giving a much larger grant. They recommended to town meeting $197,000 to the community house, which was the full ask, whereas the Wenham CPC is only recommending $50,000 of a $98,000 ask, and specifying a particular portion of the project, the heating system. So that was something, though, that the CPC did not recommend, but the selectmen have asked us to include that. So I'm not sure how Hamilton handles the grant agreement piece, but I would imagine our grant agreement could have some kind of good faith. You know, we just haven't gotten the building permit yet. That's something I can find out with only one member of the selectmen being here in the room. That's something that I would potentially raise with them at their next meeting. So I'll refer that to them. Sorry?
How much is the whole project?
They sought for 250,000, and this is phase 1. They represented to us in their application that they're going to be commencing a $2 to $3 million
Innovation.
capital campaign
Yeah.
for fundraising.
They're doing a lot, yeah.
Is this to do a complete new heating system?
I believe it's
sure.
repairs.
How much money? Repairs?
Most of what was in the line item version, the Wenham CPC only selected to grant money towards the heating system. I think it's supposed to bring it up to date and up to code and up to the best standard that it ought to be.
Not ripping out the old, replacing new, more.
We didn't get those kind of construction details on this project.
Would be repairs. If I heard, 250K, I thought that would do more than just bring it up to snuff.
Yeah, and
50K for a heating system.
well, the 250K is not just the heating system. No, that was the whole ask. And the CPC voted only to put funds towards the heating system.
Oh,
There was
sorry.
a whole line. There was a whole list of items, but the CPC only voted to the heating system. Sorry if that wasn't clear.
So it's
There was other projects
not
that
an
they
ask for
included.
heating, it's an ask for a whole bunch of stuff, and we
They-
said, we'll kick you.
And we said 50,000 for heating, and we did, there was things, a whole laundry
Thanks,
list.
Jackie.
Yeah, I'm sorry, no,
I've heard about the larger undertaking for the renovations.
yeah.
Capital
And I-
Drive and the like. What? Go ahead.
I grew up with a lot of siblings, it's just how we function.
Yeah, my best friends and I talk over each other nonstop, both full bore at the same time. I'm used to it, I prefer it.
So I'm supportive of this in general, but I'm trying to understand, is it because it's a Hamilton, the property is in Hamilton,
Correct.
and we're just supportive of it because so many Wenham residents use it? Is that acceptable under CPA?
Yes, so we're allowed
No, we
to
use the
give
pool.
things, I think the greater question of CPA eligibility on this project was not the fact that it's in Hamilton, the pool is in Hamilton, that was a joint endeavor. This eligibility.
Pool is with the joint rec department and
Open space.
And that's just a municipal version of it versus a nonprofit version. There's no delineation in CPA that you can't have support a joint nonprofit in a neighboring community that supports your residents.
That's great, I just didn't realize there was that kind of flexibility.
That's what, it's a confusing law of where there's flexibility and where there isn't. This CPC was much more concerned about whether or not this was eligible under historic preservation, and we got the info from town council. It's a local decision, but they felt that this was the piece of that list that they wanted to support this year.
I'd say it's a historic building, right? And historic building. They do good work.
They do good.
And they,
They're-
I'm supportive of it, yeah.
Yeah, they rent out the basement for the Y for the kids program, the after school program, but
After-school
they're stopping that, right? So they're no longer gonna lease to the Y. They're wrapping that up. The Y's gonna do their own thing over in Beverly, and then the community house is gonna do their own thing downstairs or wherever
In the
with the kids,
mornings
yeah.
also.
So, yeah, in the mornings as well, right, so, I don't know,
Revenue source.
taking it in-house. I support it.
No questions? No more
Or do I?
questions?
No more rambling from anyone else? No?
No.
Okay, we have a motion, or no?
mm-mm.
I don't think we do we? No? Okay, I move that FinCom recommend favorable action to town meeting for CPA appropriations article, section 6.
Second,
Thanks, Mike.
Commissioner.
No other questions, we'll move to a vote. After we get your papers.
I guess,
You got a
I mean,
question?
it's still a little bit up in the air because we don't have this language from Hamilton, but I support the idea of it.
I will say, Carrie, I only don't have that contingency language because of just the time factor from last night. So, and I don't think it was particularly complex. It was really just that it was a starting the clock deadline.
It's a reasonable thing to add in there, but with the expectation that they'll
Yeah.
have that.
It's
deadline.
normal for a construction project.
Yeah, it can't go on forever. Yeah, good point. Okay with voting on it?
Sure. Yeah,
Sure, okay.
I put my full trust in Jackie.
That's very kind.
So
You can
it's
tell
gonna
it's getting
hold
really
its
late
own.
at night. Yeah, that's very kind.
All right, with that said then, all in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. All right, next up, we've got section 7, open space and rec, 6,000 to move to it for open space trail map project. Related expenses. What do we got? Trail map project, sounds good. Anything beyond that
sorry.
that we need to know about it?
It's from the Open Space and Committee as recommended by the recently completed Open Space Master
In
Plan.
the master plan?
Master
Sweet.
Plan.
Self-explanatory. I move that FinCom,
Sorry, go ahead, I'm getting punchy.
I move that FinCom recommend favorable action town meeting for the CPA appropriations, article section 7.
Second,
Thank you. What do you got, Carrie?
I was gonna say, we can go on a FinCom hike, but
Yeah, I mean,
the moment's gone. I censored
Passed as
myself.
quickly as it came.
love the trails. Most are on map. I go through Audubon behind our house, and it's like, hey, you go this way and you end up on Cedar. No, You're on Cherry.
This is pretty cool where there's like a mobile phone that they'll walk around and have like really cool GIS of all of the trails and they'll all be labeled and it's going to be great from my understanding.
That's cool.
Yeah.
You won't get a signal, so the phone won't work because there's no freaking towers.
Well, no, but so they're using the GIS to do that tracking and then you'll get a real map so that you don't need a signal. You'll get an atlas.
Paper.
It'll reduce the fire department cost of those folks that are lost out there.
That's right. That's true. Just, yeah, exactly. They won't need to call in a rescue. Right.
Or you sometimes run into a pond, I've learned. Pond or a road.
Let's get towers. Can you sneak a tower article on here next time you meet? Towers everywhere. I know.
Whole other evening.
I say that jokingly. Obviously, they don't need to be everywhere. It can just be one or two that actually work. They get us what we need. Public safety. All right. Then we move to a vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Thanks, Jim. That was unanimous, right?
Yep.
Cool. Is this the last one? 8. I move that FinCom recommend favorable action town meeting for CPA appropriations article section 8. $1,200 to Wenham Lake Cedar Street bench.
So-called.
So-called Wenham Street.
I don't understand why town council called it that, but I wasn't going to argue about that one.
Okay.
I think I just want to say to the FinCom, just on this very, very briefly, given the late hour, that I just want to acknowledge the hard work on this by our new open space and conservation coordinator, Missy Berry. She worked very hard on this. That property is managed and owned by the Salem Beverly Water Board, and they have agreed to let the bench be there and to work with the open space committee on the installation. And they're honestly a big landowner in Wenham for obvious reasons, very protective of their water, but really good work by her to collaborate with them on this project, and I just want that acknowledged because they are a really great collaborator for us, and she did that.
Thanks for calling out her work. That's excellent.
So just, not to belabor this, what is a $1,200 bench?
Yeah, is it granite?
So it is. It's completely granite. There was a lot of discussion about the type of granite, that it's historical.
Granite bench?
It is granite, and so there will be no maintenance costs.
Is it a memorial of sorts?
TBD. I don't know if they'll be named. That's why it's the so-called Wenham Lake Cedar Street bench.
They're a grand. They're a grand if you want one over at Pingree. It's about 1,000.
Yeah.
Is that what those
Yeah.
ones- okay.
Through,
That-
you know.
I get it.
I think it's because it's
And those aren't. Those are very nice.
Yeah.
They're a composite and/or a metal, like a powder-coated metal frame, probably with I think.
I was gonna volunteer to build a bench
Yeah.
for like $100 or something.
But then that's the thing though, is with a bench, the granite bench won't have further maintenance costs. So that is,
And they're pretty indestructible.
yeah, I think that was part of the end game, is that this would just cover the cost of it getting there, staying there, being there.
I think it's great.
And permanence. It's awesome.
Yeah.
All right.
And again, another factor of the master plan, having places for people to take breaks while they're walking trails.
Yeah, it's a great location.
Yeah. Really picturesque spot. If you haven't driven by that part of Cedar Street, it's like really one of the most beautiful spots.
Front yard.
Yeah,
Very nice.
kind of, yeah.
Yeah.
Yours too. I didn't establish a motion, did I?
Nope.
I don't think so. You
Move
got
it. Move the
track records tonight.
It's my track record is terrible on these right now. Move FinCom recommend favorable action to town meeting for CPA appropriation. What is it called? Yes, Article Section 8.
Second.
Thanks, David. All in favor?
Aye.
Bench it is.
Thanks, Jackie.
That's
Thanks, Jackie. Thanks, Patty.
There's stuff in here about,
Ooh, we got more.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Curbs. Water department curbs. Saw that earlier.
it's
Curb
not on the
stops.
agenda though. That,
Is this a transfer?
We just finished.
no, but I meant there's extra stuff in here.
Oh, there's just some supplemental information for some
Okay.
of the stuff that
Okay,
FYI.
got it.
FYI.
If anyone asked me questions, I had it.
Thank you.
It's just there for your own enjoyment.
Your reading pleasure after you watch.
Is there a motion to adjourn?
Meetings.
Those were 3
weekends.
hours.
I have them on our website.
You don't have one yet.
We don't have one yet, no. Thank you, we don't. Thank you. Next meeting then, we'll just have to figure out the email as to what's needed. Patty, do you know, you don't have any needs that you know of over the next,
As far
Couple
as,
weeks.
I mean, Monday and Tuesday are out because of the selectmen will be holding a meeting.
right, yeah.
And
But you don't need us next week?
No, I don't, can't
No.
think of anything I need.
Unless we, I mean, do we wanna do the getting up to speed on the CPC
Yeah, I think
stuff
let's
from
catch up.
documents, or do we wanna have a meeting with someone?
I don't know, TBD, I think, figure out what the appetite is for that. I mean, I think that, I welcome any, any input from CPC to help us understand from a fiscal standpoint how we should be providing the recommended ask. So
So I didn't know if that would be a reason to have a meeting.
that would be a posted meeting if it's someplace out. So why don't we look into that maybe over the next week or so? I understand that they've got these tight timelines as well, where they're trying to figure out, and the BOS has yet to vote on it, but I'm sure will over the next few days. Are they voting next week on
They should
that?
be voting next week. yeah.
Next week on
They
that?
should be voting next week, yeah.
Okay.
They think they wanted it
Maybe we could,
maybe the week after.
yeah, or join their meeting quickly and just, call to
Yeah.
order and handle that alone. Although no, we can't
20
take time
minute
from it,
Q&A,
yeah.
Which one, for which,
With the BOS basically before they vote. I don't know,
to vote on what? The,
Just to
the
get-
C-
on the CPA.
The CPA one
article,
that we didn't,
yeah.
that you didn't take a
Yeah.
position on,
Well, we first need to hear from them. So why don't we talk
okay.
over the next day or two
Okay,
and figure out what the best course of action is to get that information so we're in a better position to vote.
Whether
Because
it's
frankly,
reading,
Meeting Monday, the 27th.
right. I don't know that we can pick a day right now, so it'll probably go out further than that.
So you'd have to post a meeting for Monday.
I could get one posted.
They have their own agenda as well. I'm not looking to hijack their meeting. I was just thinking that if we were to quickly vote, because that's what they'll be doing too, so.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So
As
what
long
do
as
you-
we've had
what do
information.
you recommend in the
presented.
meantime? Look at the meetings on
I was
HW
just
Cam and the
wondering
meeting
that
notes?
The CPC meeting minutes are posted online through like January, but not the actual votes in February, so Jackie offered to send them to you.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. I mean, that'll give us the background. It's just an opportunity to ask questions too, from the standpoint of like, what should FinCom really be asking about
And
these,
they're-
right?
and they're
Setting
actually
aside
Yeah.
the.
They're on
They're on
YouTube.
video too, yeah, you can watch the
I
meetings. you can
started
see
watching,
some of
that,
the
it was a
content.
3-hour one, so I didn't get
Yeah,
through
you
the
can
whole.
focus on that one.
Yeah, okay.
Slide along till you find it.
When Harbor Light was here presenting, right? That one?
No, I was talking when the committee
which
was
one?
discussing
Oh, okay,
more,
right,
rather than when he was presenting, because it wasn't a discussion
yeah.
by the committee then, so back in February,
Is that the one where they were debating whether or not to reopen the application window?
in part,
That's the one I watched.
yeah, you should
Yeah.
watch the February meetings.
Okay.
Yeah, one question I
February
have
13th, I think.
is if the 80% of median income will adequately address the affordability for senior housing needs in our community, or if that's too high. Or, how many would be less than 80%? Because there are people that I would think make less than 80% of the median income. Is that like 535,
For a house.
400?
That's
Average house.
valuation of the
That's
Oh, yeah,
median
yeah, I
valuation.
know. So, okay, I won't give numbers, but just the idea of, is
Yeah.
that an appropriate
Level?
level for
I don't know.
senior affordable housing?
That's a good question.
Don't know.
I don't
I
know.
don't have a good answer for that.
Can I make a
Okay.
motion?
Oh, yeah.
To adjourn?
Yes.
Yeah.
We have already, so we
Oh.
can just go to a vote?
All in
All in
favor?
favor? Thank you.